I'm Victoria Hayes, 32, a senior business development manager who just closed the biggest deals in our company's history. 3 Fortune 500 clients, contracts worth $820 million, and what should have been the pinnacle of my career. Instead, I walked into Monday morning to find my access revoked, my office cleared out, and a janitor's uniform waiting on my desk. My own team, people I'd mentored, protected, and trusted, had orchestrated my downfall while I was celebrating what I thought was our shared success. The betrayal shattered something inside me I didn't even know existed. But as I stood there, in that empty office, holding that uniform, I realized they'd made one critical mistake. They thought they knew everything about those contracts I'd negotiated. They had no idea what was buried in the fine print, or what would happen when I stopped protecting them from it. If you've ever felt betrayed by those you trusted most, like and subscribe for a story of quiet justice and the strength we find in our darkest moments. Let me take you back to where this all began. 6 months ago, I was riding high at Morrison & Associates, a mid-tier consulting firm that specialized in corporate restructuring. I'd been there for 8 years, climbing from junior analyst to senior business development manager through sheer determination and an uncanny ability to read what clients really needed, not just what they said they wanted. The company culture was everything you'd expect from a place trying too hard to be the next McKinsey. Open floor plans, mandatory team-building retreats, and a leadership team that threw around buzzwords like synergy and disruption, while secretly terrified of actual change. But I thrived there because I understood something my colleagues didn't. Clients don't hire consultants for their expertise. They hire them for their confidence and their ability to take responsibility when things go wrong. My corner office on the 15th floor overlooked downtown Seattle. And every morning I'd arrive with my carefully curated blend of ambition and authenticity. I wasn't the flashiest person in the room, but I was the one who delivered results. While my colleagues focused on impressing each other with PowerPoint presentations and industry jargon, I built real relationships with real people who controlled real budgets. The team I managed consisted of 4 bright, hungry professionals who reminded me of myself when I first started. There was Marcus Chen, 28, my deputy who had an MBA from Wharton and the kind of analytical mind that could spot inefficiencies from across the room. Jessica Park, 26, our research specialist who could dig up information on any company within hours and present it in a way that made complex data feel like a compelling story. Then there was Bradley Morrison, yes, relation to the founder, a 30-year-old who joined the company 3 years ago and had been riding on his last name ever since. Finally, there was Amanda Rodriguez, 29, our client relations coordinator who had a gift for making even the most difficult executives feel heard and valued. I'd invested countless hours in their development, sharing not just professional knowledge, but the hard-won wisdom that comes from years of navigating corporate politics. I taught them how to read a room, how to ask the right questions, and most importantly, how to protect themselves and their clients from the kind of short-sighted decisions that could destroy careers and companies. The irony wasn't lost on me that my dedication to their growth would eventually become the weapon they used against me. The breakthrough came in January when I received a call from Rebecca Thompson, Chief Operating Officer at Meridian Industries, a Fortune 500 manufacturing company based in Chicago. They were facing a crisis that threatened to tear apart their entire operational structure. A series of acquisitions over the past 3 years had left them with redundant systems, conflicting protocols, and a workforce that was hemorrhaging talent at an alarming rate. Victoria, Rebecca's voice was strained during our first phone call. We need someone who can come in and make sense of this chaos without destroying what's actually working. Everyone else we've talked to wants to blow everything up and start over. We can't afford that kind of disruption. I spent the next 2 weeks crafting a proposal that would revolutionize how they approached integration. Instead of the typical scorched earth restructuring that most consulting firms recommended, I proposed a surgical approach, identifying the specific pain points, preserving the valuable institutional knowledge, and creating bridges between the different systems rather than replacing them entirely. The contract was worth $280 million over 3 years, with performance bonuses that could push it even higher. It was the kind of deal that would put Morrison & Associates on the map and establish us as serious players in the Fortune 500 space. The success with Meridian Industries opened doors I never knew existed. Within 6 weeks of signing that first contract, I had 2 more Fortune 500 companies knocking on our door, not through cold calls or marketing campaigns, but through word of mouth recommendations from executives who'd heard about our innovative approach. The second client was Technova Solutions, a software company that had grown too fast for its own infrastructure. Their CEO, Michael Chong, had heard about our work with Meridian through a mutual connection at a conference in San Francisco. Unlike the typical tech executive who thought they could solve every problem with an app, Michael understood that sustainable growth required human-centered solutions. Victoria, we've tried 3 different consulting firms in the past 2 years, he told me during our initial meeting in their sleek Silicon Valley headquarters. Each one came in with the same cookie-cutter approach: fire people, automate everything, and hope for the best. We're bleeding talent, our employee satisfaction scores are at an all-time low, and somehow we're still growing at 40% year over year. We need someone who can help us grow sustainably without losing our soul. The challenge was complex. Technova had expanded from 200 employees to over 3,000 in just 18 months, acquiring 4 smaller companies along the way. Their original culture of innovation and collaboration was being suffocated by bureaucracy and competing interests from the various acquired teams. They needed integration, but they also needed to preserve what made them special in the first place. I spent 3 weeks developing a comprehensive cultural integration strategy that would maintain their innovative edge while providing the structure necessary for continued growth. The contract was worth $320 million over 4 years, with milestone bonuses based on employee retention and satisfaction metrics, but it was the 3rd client that truly changed everything. Pinnacle Financial Group reached out to me directly after. Their board of directors received a recommendation from Rebecca Thompson at Meridian. Pinnacle wasn't just any Fortune 500 company, they were a titan in the financial services industry, with assets under management exceeding $2 trillion. The CEO, Catherine Walsh, was a legend in the industry. She'd built Pinnacle from a regional investment firm into a global powerhouse through a combination of strategic acquisitions and organic growth. But after 30 years at the helm, she was planning her succession and needed someone to help navigate the complex transition without disrupting their market position. "I don't trust easily," Catherine told me during our first meeting in her corner office on the 45th floor of the Pinnacle Tower in Manhattan. "But Rebecca Thompson has never steered me wrong, and she speaks very highly of your work. I need someone who understands that our reputation took decades to build and can be destroyed in a matter of hours." The succession planning project was unlike anything I'd ever tackled. It required not just operational expertise, but deep understanding of financial regulations, market dynamics, and the delicate balance of stakeholder relationships that kept a company like Pinnacle running smoothly. The contract was worth $220 million over 2 years, with additional retention bonuses if the succession was completed without any major disruptions to their stock price or client relationships. Combined, these 3 contracts represented $820 million in revenue for Morrison & Associates, more than the company had generated in its entire 15-year history. I was flying high, working 18-hour days, and loving every minute of it. My team was equally energized, and I made sure they shared in the success with substantial bonuses and public recognition for their contributions. Looking back, I realized that success can be just as dangerous as failure. While I was focused on delivering exceptional results for our clients, I failed to notice the subtle changes in my team's behavior, the hushed conversations that stopped when I entered the room, the sideways glances during meetings, and the way they seemed to be documenting everything I did with unusual precision. I was so busy being grateful for their support that I didn't recognize they were gathering evidence. The contracts were signed on a Friday in late March. I remember the exact date, March 24th, because it was supposed to be the best day of my professional life. Instead, it became the last day I truly trusted anyone. I'd planned a celebration dinner for my team at Canlis, Seattle's most prestigious restaurant. I wanted to thank them properly for their dedication and hard work. The reservation was for 7 o'clock, and I'd already arranged for the company to pick up the tab for whatever they wanted to order. I even had a surprise prepared, individual bonus checks that would represent the largest single payments any of them had ever received. But at 5:30 p.m., just as I was preparing to leave the office, Marcus knocked on my door with an apologetic expression that I now recognize as completely fabricated. "Victoria, I'm so sorry, but I can't make it tonight," he said, shifting uncomfortably in the doorway. "My sister's in town unexpectedly, and it's been months since I've seen her. Rain check." Before I could respond, Jessica appeared behind him with her own excuse. "I'm really sorry too, but I just got a call from my landlord about a plumbing emergency. I need to be there when the repair guy arrives." Then Bradley, looking sheepish but somehow satisfied, delivered the final blow. "My girlfriend planned a surprise dinner for us. She's been working on it all week, and I can't disappoint her." Amanda was the last to cancel, texting me just as I was walking to my car. "Food poisoning. Spent the afternoon in the bathroom. So sorry to miss celebrating with you." I sat in my car in the parking garage for 20 minutes, staring at those text messages and feeling something I couldn't quite name. It wasn't just disappointment, it was a creeping sense that something was fundamentally wrong. In 8 years at Morrison & Associates, my team had never missed a celebration. They'd shown up sick, cancelled personal plans, and even rearranged family obligations to be there for important moments, but this wasn't just any celebration. This was the biggest success in the company's history, and they'd all found excuses to be somewhere else. I drove home to my apartment in Capitol Hill and spent the evening on my couch with a bottle of wine and my laptop, reviewing the contracts one more time. As I scrolled through the legal language and financial projections, I felt a surge of pride mixed with something else, a protective instinct that I'd never experienced before. These weren't just business deals. They were relationships built on trust, mutual respect, and the promise that I would deliver results that exceeded expectations. Rebecca Thompson had trusted me with Meridian's future. Michael Chong had bet Technova's cultural evolution on my strategy. Catherine Walsh had entrusted me with Pinnacle's succession, a process that could affect millions of investors and thousands of employees. The weight of that responsibility should have felt overwhelming, but instead it felt empowering. Ide proban. That I could compete at the highest level, that I could deliver solutions that no one else could imagine, and that I could build lasting relationships with the most influential executives in the world. I went to bed that night feeling grateful for my team's support, even if they couldn't be there to celebrate with me. I assumed they were just tired from the intensive work of the past few months and looking forward to a well-deserved break. I had no idea they were spending that evening in Bradley's apartment, planning my professional destruction over takeout, Chinese food and craft beer. I didn't know that Marcus had been documenting every conversation I'd had with clients, that Jessica had been secretly recording our strategy sessions, or that Amanda had been feeding information to Bradley's father about my negotiation tactics and client relationships. I certainly didn't know that Bradley had been promised a promotion to Senior Business Development Manager, my position, as soon as they could find a way to remove me from the equation. The irony is that I'd taught them everything they needed to know about corporate warfare. I'd shown them how to gather intelligence, how to build alliances, and how to strike at the perfect moment when your target is most vulnerable. I just never imagined they'd use those skills against me, but there was one thing I hadn't taught them, something I'd learned the hard way through years of surviving in competitive environments: always have a backup plan, and never trust anyone completely, not even the people you love most. I should have known something was wrong when my phone stayed silent all weekend. In the 8 years I'd worked at Morrison & Associates, I'd never gone more than a few hours without some kind of communication from my team, quick questions about client calls, updates on project timelines, or just casual check-ins about weekend plans. But from Friday evening until Monday morning, nothing. Not a single text, email, or call. I spent Saturday morning at Pike Place Market, treating myself to fresh flowers and artisanal coffee, small luxuries I denied myself during the intensive months of contract negotiations. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. The pressure was off, the deals were signed, and I had a team I trusted to help me deliver exceptional results. Saturday afternoon, I decided to do something I'd been putting off for months. I called my parents in Portland to share the good news. My mother, ever the pragmatist, was cautiously optimistic. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," she said, but I could hear the concern in her voice. "Just remember that success can make people jealous. Be careful who you trust." My father, a retired Boeing engineer who'd navigated his own share of corporate politics, was more direct. "Victoria, you've just made yourself a very visible target. The bigger the success, the more people will want to tear you down. Watch your back." I laughed off their warnings at the time. My team wasn't just colleagues, they were protégés, people I'd invested in personally and professionally. I'd attended their birthday parties, written recommendation letters for their graduate school applications, and stayed late countless nights helping them work through complex problems. But parents have a way of seeing things that love and loyalty can obscure. Sunday morning, I decided to treat myself to brunch at Altura, a quiet restaurant in Capitol Hill where I could sit by the window and plan my next moves. The contracts were signed, but implementation would begin in earnest within the next few weeks. I needed to think strategically about resource allocation, timeline management, and the delicate balance of keeping 3 major clients happy simultaneously. As I sat there with my notebook and coffee, sketching out organizational charts and project timelines, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This was what I'd been working toward my entire career: the chance to make a real impact at the highest level of business, to prove that innovative thinking and genuine relationships could triumph over corporate bureaucracy and short-term thinking. I was so absorbed in my planning that I almost didn't notice the familiar figure walking past the restaurant window. It was Marcus, laughing and gesturing animatedly as he walked with someone I didn't recognize. What struck me as odd wasn't that he was out enjoying his weekend, but that he was carrying a thick folder under his arm and seemed to be in the middle of an intense conversation. I watched him until he disappeared around the corner, feeling a small knot of unease in my stomach. Marcus was meticulous about work-life balance. He'd made it clear from the beginning that weekends were sacred, and he rarely brought work materials home unless there was an absolute emergency, but I pushed the thought away. Maybe he was working on a personal project, or helping a friend with something. There were dozens of innocent explanations for what I'd seen. Sunday evening, I sent a group text to my team, "Hope everyone had a great weekend. Looking forward to celebrating our success and planning next steps tomorrow morning. Coffee and pastries in the conference room at 8 a.m.? The responses came back quickly, but looking back, I can see how carefully orchestrated they were. Marcus. Sounds great. Can't wait to dive into the implementation phase. Jessica, perfect. I've been thinking about some research strategies we should discuss. Bradley, looking forward to it. I have some ideas about team restructuring that might interest you. Amanda, see you bright and early. I've already started organizing the client files. At the time, their enthusiasm felt genuine. Now I recognize the subtle undercurrents: Marcus's eagerness to dive in to work he'd already been doing behind my back, Jessica's research strategies that involved investigating my vulnerabilities, Bradley's team restructuring that centered on removing me from the equation, and Amanda's organizing that meant preparing evidence for my downfall. I went to bed Sunday night feeling grateful for my team's dedication and excited about the challenges ahead. I set my alarm for 6 a.m., planning to get to the office early to set up the celebration and prepare for what I thought would be a strategic planning session. Instead, I was walking into the most professionally devastating day of my life. I arrived at the office at 7:15 a.m., carrying a box of pastries from Grand Central Bakery and a thermos of the good coffee, not the bitter swill from the office machine, but the Ethiopian blend I discovered during a client meeting in Portland. I wanted this Monday morning to be special, a proper celebration of what we'd accomplished together. The building was still mostly empty, just the security guard and a few early arrivals from the accounting department. I took the elevator to the 15th floor, humming softly to myself as I planned the day ahead. First, we'd celebrate. Then we'd dive into the implementation planning. By the end of the week, I wanted to have detailed project timelines for all 3 clients and a clear understanding of everyone's roles and responsibilities. I badged into the office and immediately knew something was wrong. The lights were already on in the conference room, and I could hear voices, not just my team, but others. I recognized the voice of Robert Morrison, the company founder, and what sounded like someone from HR, but it was my office that stopped me cold. The door was propped open, and I could see boxes stacked on my desk. Moving boxes. The kind you use when someone is being relocated or removed. I stood there for a moment, pastries in one hand and coffee in the other, trying to process what I was seeing. Then I heard my name being called from the direction of the conference room. "Victoria, please join us." Robert Morrison's voice carried a tone I'd never heard before, formal, distant, almost legal. I set down the pastries and coffee on the reception desk and walked toward the conference room, my heels clicking on the polished floor with what felt like ominous finality. Through the glass walls, I could see the assembled group. Robert Morrison, Patricia Wells from HR, and my entire team. They were all seated around the conference table, and there was a single empty chair at the far end, clearly meant for me. "Please, have a seat." Robert gestured to the chair, and I noticed that everyone avoided making eye contact with me. Everyone except Bradley, who looked directly at me with an expression I'd never seen before, not the eager, slightly insecure junior executive I'd been mentoring, but someone who looked satisfied, almost triumphant. Patricia Wells opened a folder and began reading from what was clearly a prepared statement. "Victoria, we've received serious allegations about your conduct regarding the recent client contracts. Specifically, concerns have been raised about potential conflicts of interest, unauthorized commitments to clients, and failure to properly document decision-making processes." The words hit me like physical blows. Conflicts of interest? Unauthorized commitments? I'd documented everything, followed every protocol, and kept the entire team informed of every significant decision. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice steadier. Then I felt, "But I don't understand what you're talking about. What specific allegations? Who made these claims?" Robert Morrison leaned forward, his expression pained but resolute. "Victoria, your team members have come forward with concerns about your handling of these contracts. They've provided documentation showing instances where you made commitments to clients without proper authorization, promised deliverables that exceed our current capabilities, and potentially exposed the company to significant liability." I looked around the table at my team, people I'd trusted, mentored, and protected. Marcus was staring at his hands. Jessica was taking notes. Amanda looked like she might cry. But Bradley was still looking directly at me, and I saw something in his eyes that made my blood run cold. This wasn't about protecting the company or addressing genuine concerns. This was personal. I'd like to see this documentation, I said, my voice growing stronger. And I'd like to understand exactly what commitments you believe I made without authorization. Patricia Wells slid a thick folder across the table. These are transcripts of conversations you had with clients, along with email exchanges and meeting notes. They show a pattern of making promises that put the company at risk. I opened the folder and began reading, my confusion growing with each page. These were conversations I'd had with clients, but they were presented completely out of context. A discussion about potential future services was characterized as an unauthorized commitment. A strategic brainstorming session was described as promising deliverables beyond our capabilities. But what disturbed me most was the level of detail. Someone had been recording our conversations, documenting our private strategy sessions, and building a case against me for months. Who compiled this information? I asked, though I was beginning to suspect the answer. Your team members came forward collectively, Robert said. They were concerned about the potential impact on the company and felt they had an obligation to report what they'd observed. I closed the folder and looked around the table again. So you're telling me that my entire team has been spying on me, documenting my work, and building a case against me while I was securing the 3 largest contracts in the company's history? The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Bradley spoke up, his voice carrying a confidence I'd never heard before. Victoria, we were trying to protect the company. Some of the things you were promising clients seemed impossible to deliver, and we were concerned about the legal and financial implications. What exactly did I promise that seemed impossible? I asked, genuinely curious to understand their perspective. Marcus finally looked up from his hands. You told Meridian we could integrate their systems without any downtime. You promised Technova we could maintain their culture while restructuring their entire operation. You guaranteed Pinnacle that the succession transition would be seamless. I stared at him, incredulous. Those weren't promises, Marcus. Those were goals. And they're absolutely achievable with the right strategy and execution, strategies that I've already developed and that all of you helped create. But what if they're not achievable? Jessica interjected. What if something goes wrong? The company could be sued for breach of contract, and we could all lose our jobs. And there it was, the real fear driving this betrayal. They weren't concerned about the company's welfare or the client's success. They were afraid of being held accountable for ambitious goals, afraid of the hard work required to achieve something extraordinary, afraid of the responsibility that comes with playing at the highest level. So your solution, I said slowly, was to sabotage the person who made those contracts possible in the first place? Robert Morrison cleared his throat. Victoria, we've decided that it would be best for everyone if you took a step back from client-facing responsibilities while we sort through these concerns. We're reassigning you to an internal operations role where you can contribute to the company's success without the pressure of managing major client relationships. I felt something inside me break, not just my heart, but my faith in everything I'd believed about loyalty, trust, and the value of hard work. What kind of internal operations role? Patricia Wells consulted her notes. We're creating a new position focused on office management and facilities coordination. You'll be responsible for ensuring that our work environment meets the highest standards of cleanliness and organization. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Office management and facilities coordination. They were making me the janitor. I looked at Bradley, who was no longer trying to hide his satisfaction. And I suppose you'll be taking over my client relationships? The team will be managed collectively, Robert said, but I could see the lie in his eyes. Bradley had orchestrated this entire coup, and he was about to be rewarded with my position, my clients, and my career. I stood up slowly, my mind racing through the implications of what was happening. 8 years of building relationships, establishing trust, and delivering results, all of it was being erased by people I'd considered family. I need to gather my personal items, I said, my voice hollow. We've already packed everything, Patricia said gently. Your personal belongings are in the boxes on your desk. We thought it would be easier for everyone. Easier for everyone. They'd planned this down to the last detail, including the humiliation of having my office cleaned out before I even knew what was happening. I walked back to my former office, past the reception desk where my pastries and coffee still sat untouched. The boxes on my desk contained 8 years of my professional life, photos, awards, personal books, and the small mementos that had made the space feel like home, but sitting on top of the largest box was something that made my blood freeze, a janitor's uniform. Still in its plastic packaging, with a note attached that read, "Your new position starts immediately. Report to facilities management on the 3rd floor." I stood there holding that uniform, feeling the weight of betrayal and humiliation crushing down on me. But underneath the shock and hurt, something else was stirring, a cold, calculating anger that I'd never experienced before. They thought they'd won. They thought they'd successfully removed me from the equation and could claim credit for my work. But there was something they didn't know, something I'd never shared with any of them, not even in our most trusted moments, those contracts they were so eager to claim. They contained provisions that only I knew about, safeguards I'd negotiated specifically to protect against the kind of corporate instability that was about to tear Morrison and Associates apart. And in exactly 72 hours, they were going to discover just how catastrophic their betrayal would be, not just for me, but for everyone involved. I carried the boxes to my car in 3 trips, each one feeling like a funeral procession. The parking garage was still mostly empty, and my footsteps echoed off the concrete walls with a hollow finality that seemed to underscore everything I'd lost in the span of 30 minutes, but it was the uniform that I couldn't stop thinking about. Not just the fact that they'd reduced me to janitorial work, but the calculated cruelty of having it waiting for me, still in its packaging, like a punchline to a joke I'd never heard coming. I sat in my car for a long time, staring at that plastic-wrapped uniform on my passenger seat. The label read, Morrison and Associates Facilities Management, in small print, as if they'd had it specially made for this moment. The premeditation of it all was staggering. They hadn't just decided to demote me, they'd planned this humiliation down to the last detail. My phone buzzed with a text from Patricia Wells. Please report to Facilities Management on the 3rd floor at 1 p.m. for orientation. Ask for Miguel Rodriguez, the facilities supervisor. I stared at the message, feeling something shift inside me. The hurt was still there, raw and deep, but it was being joined by something else, a cold clarity that I'd never experienced before. They'd made a mistake, and it wasn't just the obvious one of underestimating me. I drove home to my apartment and sat at my kitchen table with my laptop, opening the files I'd kept on my personal computer, backup copies of all the contracts, correspondence, and negotiation notes. I'd learned years ago to never rely entirely on company systems, and that paranoia was about to pay off in ways I'd never imagined. The first thing I did was read through all 3 contracts completely, word by word, paying special attention to the clauses that I'd negotiated personally but hadn't shared with my team. These weren't deceptive provisions, they were standard protective measures that any experienced negotiator would include. But they were complex enough that someone without deep contract experience might not recognize their significance. In the Meridian Industries contract, there was a key executive clause that I'd insisted on during negotiations. It stated that if there were any significant changes to the Morrison and Associates team managing the project, specifically, if the lead negotiator was removed or replaced, Meridian had the right to terminate the contract with 72 hours written notice. The termination would trigger a penalty clause requiring Morrison and Associates to pay liquidated damages of $50 million. The Technova contract contained a similar provision, but even more stringent. Michael Chung had been concerned about continuity and had specifically requested that I personally oversee the implementation. The contract stated that my removal from the project would constitute a material breach, allowing Technova to terminate immediately and seek damages of $75 million. But it was the Pinnacle financial contract that contained the most devastating provision. Catherine Walsh had been burned by consulting firms before, and she'd insisted on what she called a stability guarantee. If the lead consultant was removed from the project for any reason other than voluntary departure or mutual agreement, Pinnacle could not only terminate the contract but also demand the immediate return of all fees paid to date, plus additional damages of $95 million. I'd negotiated these clauses as protection for both sides. They ensured that clients wouldn't be left high and dry if a consulting firm decided to change teams mid-project, and they protected consultants from being arbitrarily removed by companies looking to avoid payment. They were standard and high-stakes consulting agreements, but they required careful explanation and client education. I'd planned to walk my team through these provisions during our Monday morning meeting. Instead, they'd ambushed me before I could share this crucial information. I checked my watch, 11:30 a.m. In an hour and a half, I was supposed to report to Facilities Management to begin my new career as a janitor. But first, I had some calls to make. I started with Rebecca Thompson at Meridian Industries. She answered on the second ring, her voice warm and professional. Victoria, I was hoping to hear from you. We're excited to get started on the implementation phase. When can we schedule the first strategy session? Rebecca, I said, choosing my words carefully, I need to inform you of a significant development. Morrison and Associates has made some changes to their team structure, and I'm no longer in a position to oversee your project. There was a long pause. I'm sorry, what? Victoria, you negotiated this contract personally. You're the reason we chose Morrison and Associates in the first place. What do you mean you're no longer overseeing the project? I've been reassigned to other responsibilities within the company, I said, keeping my voice neutral. I wanted to inform you personally before you heard it from someone else. This is completely unacceptable. Rebecca's voice was sharp. Who authorized this change? And who's supposed to replace you? I believe Bradley Morrison will be taking over client relationships, I said. Bradley Morrison? The founder's son? Victoria, with all due respect, I've met him twice, and he impressed me about as much as a wet paper bag. This isn't what we agreed to. I understand your concerns, Rebecca. I think you should discuss this directly with Robert Morrison. But I wanted you to know that if you're not comfortable with these changes, you should review Section 12.3 of your contract. Another pause, longer this time. Victoria, are you telling me what I think you're telling me? I'm telling you to review your contract and make whatever decision is best for Meridian Industries. I'll call you back, she said, and hung up. My second call was to Michael Chong at Technova. His reaction was even more explosive. They did what? He shouted into the phone. Victoria, you spent 3 weeks understanding our culture, our challenges, our vision. You developed a strategy that's specifically tailored to our company. Now they're telling me some junior executive is going to take over. I'm sorry, Michael. I know this isn't what you expected. It's not what I expected, and it's not what I'm paying for. I'm calling Robert Morrison right now, and if this isn't resolved immediately, I'm reviewing our termination options. You might want to look at Section 8.7 of your contract, I suggested. Trust me, I will. Catherine Walsh at Pinnacle Financial was the most controlled in her response, but also the most ominous. Victoria, I've been in this business for 30 years, and I've seen every kind of corporate game imaginable. What you're describing sounds like internal politics, and I don't have time for internal politics. I hired you specifically because I trusted your judgment and your ability to deliver results. If Morrison and Associates thinks they can bait and switch me with some inexperienced replacement, they're about to learn a very expensive lesson. I'm sorry this puts you in a difficult position, Catherine. Oh, I'm not in a difficult position. Morrison and Associates is in a difficult position. I'm going to review our contract very carefully, and then I'm going to make some calls. This kind of behavior is unacceptable, and there need to be consequences. By 12:45 p.m., I'd made all 3 calls. I put on the janitor's uniform. It was surprisingly well made, with reinforced knees and multiple pockets, and drove back to Morrison and Associates. As I walked through the lobby toward the elevator, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirrored wall. 8 hours ago, I'd been a senior business development manager on top of the world. Now I was dressed like a janitor, carrying a bucket and mop, about to report to facilities management, but for the first time since this nightmare began, I was smiling, because at exactly 1 p.m., while I was learning how to properly clean office windows, 3 of the most powerful executives in the Fortune 500 were reading their contracts and preparing to make the most expensive phone calls in Morrison and Associates history. The 72-hour countdown had begun. Miguel Rodriguez was a kind man in his 50s who'd been working facilities management for Morrison and Associates for 12 years. When I introduced myself, he looked genuinely confused. "You're Victoria Hayes?" he asked, checking his clipboard. "The Victoria Hayes who just signed those big contracts?" "That's me," I said, adjusting the uncomfortable polyester uniform. Miguel shook his head. "I don't understand what's happening upstairs, but I know good people when I see them. You shouldn't be here." "Maybe not," I agreed, "but I am here, and I'd like to learn how to do the job properly." He studied my face for a moment, then nodded slowly. "All right. If you're going to do this, we'll do it right. But I want you to know, I've been watching this company for 12 years, and I've never seen anything like what happened to you today. It's not right." Miguel spent the next 2 hours teaching me the fundamentals of commercial cleaning. How to properly sanitize surfaces, the difference between various cleaning products, the most efficient way to vacuum large office spaces, and the delicate art of cleaning windows without leaving streaks. "The thing about cleaning," he told me, as we worked our way through the 3rd floor, is that it's honest work. You can see the results immediately. You know when you've done a good job, and you know when you've cut corners. It's not like some of the other work in this building. I found myself genuinely interested in his techniques. There was something meditative about the physical work, something grounding about focusing on simple, achievable tasks after months of complex negotiations and strategic planning, but the real education came when Miguel showed me how to clean the executive floor. "This is where you'll spend most of your time," he said as we stepped off the elevator onto the 15th floor, my old floor. "The executives like everything perfect, and they notice every detail. But they also like to pretend we don't exist while we're working." As we walked past my former office, I could see Bradley sitting behind my desk, talking animatedly on the phone. My diplomas and awards had been replaced with his own certificates, and he'd rearranged the furniture to face away from the window, a power move that would have been laughable if it wasn't so obviously calculated. "See how he's got his back to the window?" Miguel observed quietly. "That's a man who's afraid someone might sneak up on him." We moved through the floor systematically, Miguel showing me the proper techniques for each area. As we worked, I couldn't help but notice the conversations happening around us. Miguel had been right, the executives did seem to consider the cleaning staff invisible. In the conference room, I overheard Marcus and Jessica discussing damage control strategies and client communication protocols. They were clearly preparing for pushback from the clients, but their conversation suggested they had no idea about the contract provisions that were about to detonate their careers. "The key is to position this as a strategic reorganization," Jessica was saying. "We emphasize the team approach and the continuity of service." "Right," Marcus agreed. "And we make sure they understand that removing Victoria was about protecting the company's interests, not undermining the projects." I kept my head down and continued cleaning, but I was listening to every word. They were so confident in their coup, so certain that they'd outmaneuvered me, that they weren't even being discreet about their planning. Near the end of the day, Miguel and I were cleaning the break room on the 15th floor when Robert Morrison walked in to get coffee. He glanced at me briefly, his expression unreadable, then addressed Miguel. "How's the new team member working out?" he asked. "She's a fast learner," Miguel replied diplomatically. "Very thorough." Robert nodded and left without saying anything directly to me. But I could see the discomfort in his eyes. Unlike Bradley, who seemed to relish my humiliation, Robert Morrison looked like a man who was beginning to question the wisdom of what he'd done. At 5:30 p.m., Miguel and I finished our rounds. As we put away the cleaning supplies, he turned to me with a serious expression. "Victoria, I need to tell you something. I've been in this building for 12 years, and I hear things. People talk around the cleaning staff like we're not here. What happened to you today? It's not just about you. There are people in this company who are scared of what you accomplished, scared of what it means for their own positions." "I'm beginning to understand that," I said. "But here's what they don't understand," Miguel continued. "When you tear down someone who's been holding things together, you better be prepared for what falls apart. I've seen it happen before. Companies that get rid of their best people because they're threatened by their success, those companies don't last long." As I drove home that evening, still wearing the janitor's uniform, I reflected on Miguel's words. He was right about one thing: I had been holding things together. The contracts I'd negotiated weren't just business deals, they were carefully constructed relationships built on trust, expertise, and personal rapport. My team had assumed they could simply step into my shoes and continue as if nothing had changed. They were about to discover how wrong they were. I checked my phone as I pulled into my parking spot. I had 17 missed calls, 5 from Robert Morrison, 4 from Patricia Wells, 3 from Bradley, 2 from Marcus, 2 from Jessica, and 1 from Amanda. There were also multiple text messages, emails, and voicemails. I didn't return any of them. Not yet. Instead, I went upstairs to my apartment, changed out of the uniform, and poured myself a glass of wine. Then I sat on my couch and began listening to the voicemails, starting with the oldest. The first one was from Robert Morrison, left at 2:15 p.m. "Victoria, we need to talk. Please call me as soon as you get this message." By 4:30 p.m., his tone had changed completely. "Victoria, I'm not sure what you said to the clients, but we need to resolve this immediately. Please call me." The final voicemail, left at 5:45 p.m., was from Bradley, and his earlier confidence had evaporated. "Victoria, I think there's been a misunderstanding. We need to discuss the client situation. Please call me back tonight." I smiled as I deleted the last message. There had been no misunderstanding. For the first time in months, everything was perfectly clear. I had 48 hours left on the countdown. And judging by the panic in those voicemails, my former colleagues were beginning to realize that their corporate coup might have been the most expensive mistake in the company's history. The next morning, I would put on the janitor's uniform again and return to Morrison and Associates. But not as a victim, as someone who was about to watch $820 million in contracts disappear because of greed, betrayal, and the fatal assumption that loyal employees will always be there to clean up other people's messes. Sometimes the person holding the mop is the one with all the power. I arrived at Morrison and Associates at 7 a.m. on Tuesday, dressed in my janitor's uniform and carrying the cleaning supplies Miguel had assigned to me. The building was quiet, with only security and a few early arrivals from other floors. I badged in and took the elevator to the 15th floor, where I was supposed to begin my morning routine, but as the elevator doors opened, I could immediately tell something was wrong. The lights were already on in multiple offices, and I could hear raised voices coming from the conference room. It was barely past 7 a.m., but the executive floor was buzzing with activity. I wheeled my cleaning cart down the hallway, moving slowly and deliberately while keeping my ears open. The voices from the conference room were getting louder, and I could make out Robert Morrison's voice, along with several others I didn't recognize. As I got closer, I realized they were on a conference call. "I understand your concerns, Ms. Thompson," Robert was saying, his voice strained. "But I assure you that this transition will be seamless. Bradley Morrison has been working closely with Victoria on all aspects of your project." I couldn't hear Rebecca Thompson's response, but I could imagine her tone based on Robert's increasingly defensive posture. No, that's not necessary," Robert continued. "I'm confident we can resolve this without involving legal counsel. Bradley, would you like to explain your approach to the Meridian integration?" I positioned myself outside the conference room, ostensibly cleaning a water stain on the wall while listening to Bradley's response. His voice was higher than usual, a sure sign that he was nervous. "Well, Mr. Morrison, I believe we should focus on the core deliverables that Victoria outlined in her proposal. The key is to maintain continuity while bringing fresh perspectives to the implementation process." Even through the conference room walls, I could hear the silence that followed. It was the kind of silence that occurs when someone gives a completely inadequate answer to a serious question. Robert's voice returned, even more strained. "Ms. Thompson, perhaps we could schedule a face-to-face meeting to discuss your concerns in more detail." I moved away from the conference room as the call continued, but I could hear enough to understand that it wasn't going well. Rebecca Thompson was clearly not satisfied with Bradley's explanation, and Robert was scrambling to salvage the situation. As I continued my cleaning routine, I noticed that other offices were occupied earlier than usual. Marcus was at his desk, surrounded by stacks of papers and looking like he hadn't slept. Jessica was on the phone, frantically taking notes. Amanda was at her computer, typing furiously with a look of panic on her face. At 8:30 a.m., I was cleaning the windows in the hallway when I heard shouting from Robert Morrison's office. The door was closed, but his voice was loud enough to carry through the walls. "What do you mean they're terminating the contract? We haven't even started implementation yet." I couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but Robert's responses painted a clear picture of what was happening. 72 hours? That's not enough time to resolve this. We need to discuss alternative solutions. I kept cleaning, moving closer to his office door. "I understand you have concerns about continuity, but Bradley Morrison is a highly qualified professional with extensive experience in corporate restructuring." The silence that followed suggested that whoever was on the other end of the call was not impressed by Bradley's qualifications. "Mr. Chung, please don't make any hasty decisions. We can arrange for Victoria to consult on the project in an advisory capacity." My heart skipped a beat. Michael Chung from Technova was clearly following through on his threat to review the termination clauses. "I see. Well, if that's your final decision, we'll need to discuss the financial implications." Robert's voice had gone flat, the tone of someone who was beginning to understand the magnitude of what was happening. At 9:15 a.m., Bradley emerged from his office, my former office, looking disheveled and panicked. He walked quickly to the conference room where Marcus and Jessica were waiting, and I could see them through the glass walls as they huddled around a laptop. I wheeled my cart closer to the conference room, ostensibly to clean the glass walls, and caught fragments of their conversation. "The Pinnacle contract has a stability clause," Jessica was saying, reading from the laptop screen. "If the lead consultant is removed, they can terminate with immediate effect and demand full restitution plus damages." "How much in damages?" Bradley asked. $95 million, Marcus replied, his voice barely audible. Bradley's face went white. "That's just one contract. What about the others?" "Meridian is $50 million, Technova is $75 million, Jessica said. "If all three contracts are terminated, we're looking at total damages of over $200 million. Plus the loss of $820 million in revenue," Marcus added. Bradley slumped in his chair. "How did we not know about these clauses?" "Victoria never mentioned them," Jessica said. "She must have negotiated them without telling us." "She must have planned this," Bradley said, his voice rising. "She set us up." I continued cleaning the glass wall, keeping my expression neutral while listening to their growing panic. The irony was almost too much to bear. They'd accused me of making unauthorized commitments and exposing the company to liability, when in reality, I'd been protecting the company with carefully negotiated safeguards that they were too inexperienced to understand. At 10:30 a.m., Patricia Wells from HR arrived on the floor, looking grim. She went directly to Robert Morrison's office and closed the door behind her. 20 minutes later, she emerged and walked to the conference room where Bradley, Marcus, and Jessica were still huddled. "I need to speak with all of you," she said, her voice carrying an authority that made everyone in the room sit up straighter. I positioned myself at the window nearest the conference room, spraying glass cleaner and wiping in slow, deliberate circles while straining to hear the conversation. "We've received formal termination notices from 2 of the 3 clients," Patricia said. "Meridian Industries and Technova Solutions have both invoked their termination clauses, citing breach of contract due to unauthorized changes in project leadership." "What about Pinnacle?" Bradley asked, though he sounded like he already knew the answer. "Catherine Walsh is flying in from New York this afternoon for a face-to-face meeting with Robert. She's bringing her legal team." The silence in the conference room was deafening. "What are our options?" Marcus asked. "Legally? Very limited. These contracts were negotiated by someone with extensive experience in high-stakes consulting agreements. The termination clauses are ironclad." "But Victoria was the one who negotiated them," Jessica protested. "She's the one who put the company at risk." Patricia's response was sharp. "Victoria negotiated those clauses to protect both the company and the clients. They're standard provisions in contracts of this magnitude. The fact that none of you were aware of them suggests that you weren't as involved in the negotiation process as you claimed." I saw Bradley's face flush red. "She kept us in the dark deliberately. She was planning this betrayal from the beginning." "Or," Patricia said coldly, "she was protecting proprietary information and confidential negotiation strategies, which is exactly what a senior business development manager should do." I finished cleaning the windows and moved my cart away from the conference room, but I could still hear Patricia's voice carrying down the hallway. "The board is meeting in emergency session at 2 p.m. All of you need to be prepared to explain your actions and provide documentation for your allegations against Victoria. And I suggest you start thinking about how to explain to the board why the company is about to lose $820 million in revenue and face over $200 million in damages." As I wheeled my cart toward the elevator, I passed Robert Morrison's office. He was on the phone again, and I could hear the desperation in his voice. "Catherine, please, we can work this out. Victoria is still with the company. She's just been reassigned to different responsibilities. We can bring her back to the project immediately." I pressed the elevator button and waited, listening to Robert's increasingly frantic attempts to salvage the situation. "I understand your position, but please don't make any final decisions until we can meet in person. We've been partners for 15 years. Surely that counts for something." The elevator arrived, and I stepped inside. As the doors closed, I caught a glimpse of Bradley standing in the hallway, staring at me with a mixture of rage and desperation. He was beginning to understand that his corporate coup had backfired spectacularly. I had 24 hours left on the countdown, and Morrison and Associates was falling apart exactly as I'd predicted. The only question now was whether Robert Morrison would swallow his pride and admit that destroying my career had been the most expensive mistake in the company's history, but based on what I'd heard that morning, I suspected it was already too late for apologies. At 2:30 p.m. on Tuesday, I was cleaning the lobby windows when a black town car pulled up to the entrance of Morrison and Associates. I watched as Catherine Walsh stepped out, followed by 2 men in expensive suits carrying leather briefcases. Even from a distance, her presence commanded attention. She moved with the kind of confidence that comes from 3 decades of making decisions that affect billions of dollars and thousands of lives. I'd met Catherine several times during the contract negotiations, and I'd always been impressed by her combination of sharp intelligence and genuine warmth. She was the kind of executive who remembered personal details about everyone she worked with, from CEOs to administrative assistants. But the woman walking into the Morrison and Associates lobby looked like she was preparing for war. I continued cleaning the windows as she approached the security desk, her heels clicking on the polished marble floor with military precision. The security guard looked up from his newspaper, and I could see him straighten in his chair as he recognized the gravity of the situation. "Catherine Walsh to see Robert Morrison," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the lobby. "I'm expected." Within minutes, Robert Morrison appeared, flanked by Patricia Wells and looking like a man who'd aged 10 years in the past 24 hours. His usually perfect appearance was disheveled, his tie slightly askew, and there were dark circles under his eyes that suggested he hadn't slept. "Catherine, thank you for coming," he said, extending his hand. "I'm hopeful we can resolve this situation to everyone's satisfaction." Catherine shook his hand briefly, her expression neutral. "Robert, I think you misunderstand the nature of this meeting. I'm not here to negotiate. I'm here to inform you of Pinnacle's decision and to ensure that the termination process proceeds according to the terms of our contract." The 2 lawyers flanking her stepped forward, and I could see Robert's face pale as he realized this wasn't going to be a friendly conversation about finding alternatives. "Perhaps we could discuss this in private," Robert suggested, glancing around the lobby. Of course, Catherine agreed. But I should mention that I've also asked Victoria Hayes to join us. She was instrumental in negotiating our original agreement, and I believe her input will be valuable in ensuring a smooth transition. I nearly dropped my spray bottle. Catherine Walsh wanted me in the meeting? As the janitor, Robert's face went through several expressions: confusion, panic, and then something that looked like trapped desperation. Catherine, I'm not sure that's appropriate. Victoria is no longer in a client-facing role. Which is precisely why Pinnacle is terminating our contract, Catherine said, her voice growing cooler. Victoria Hayes negotiated our agreement personally, developed our strategic framework, and established the trust relationship that made this partnership possible. Your decision to remove her from the project constitutes a material breach of our contract. But she's still with the company, Robert protested. We can arrange for her to consult on the project. Robert, let me be very clear about something, Catherine said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd been managing corporate crises longer than most people had been alive. I don't pay $300 million for consulting services so that I can work with junior executives who don't understand my business. I pay that money to work with the best, and Victoria Hayes is the best. Your decision to demote her tells me that Morrison and Associates no longer values excellence, which means you're no longer the right partner for Pinnacle Financial. As they moved toward the elevators, I heard Catherine add, and Robert? I'd like Victoria to join us immediately. Whatever her current role, she's still your employee, and she's still bound by the confidentiality agreements related to our project. I watched the elevator doors close, feeling a mixture of anticipation and dread. Catherine Walsh was about to summon me to a meeting where I would sit across from the people who'd destroyed my career, wearing a janitor's uniform, while discussing the termination of the largest contract in the company's history. 20 minutes later, Patricia Wells appeared in the lobby, looking around until she spotted me by the windows. Victoria, she said, her voice uncertain. Ms. Walsh has requested your presence in the conference room. I set down my cleaning supplies and followed her to the elevator. As we rode up to the 15th floor, Patricia cleared her throat. Victoria, I want you to know that I had reservations about yesterday's decision. But the board felt it was necessary given the allegations. What allegations specifically? I asked, genuinely curious. That you'd made unauthorized commitments to clients and exposed the company to liability. I almost laughed. Patricia, did anyone actually read the contracts before making that decision? Her silence was answer enough. When we entered the conference room, I was struck by the visual contrast. On one side of the table sat Catherine Walsh and her two lawyers, all impeccably dressed and radiating confidence. On the other side sat Robert, Morrison, Bradley, Marcus, and Jessica, looking like defendants at a trial. Catherine stood when she saw me, extending her hand with a warm smile. Victoria, thank you for joining us. I'm sorry to hear about your recent change in responsibilities. Thank you, Catherine, I replied, shaking her hand and taking the seat she gestured to, notably on her side of the table. Now then, Catherine continued, sitting back down and opening a folder, let's discuss the termination of our contract. Robert, I've reviewed the provisions that Victoria negotiated, and I must say, they're quite comprehensive. Section 15.2 specifically states that any change in project leadership without client approval constitutes a material breach. But we're not changing project leadership, Bradley interjected. We're simply restructuring the team to provide better service. Catherine turned to look at Bradley with the kind of expression that had probably intimidated Fortune 500 CEOs for decades. I'm sorry, who are you? Bradley Morrison, he said, his voice cracking slightly. I'm the new Senior Business Development Manager. I'll be taking over Victoria's responsibilities. I see, Catherine said, making a note in her folder. And what experience do you have with succession planning for financial services companies? Bradley's face flushed. I have extensive experience in corporate restructuring and strategic planning. That's not what I asked, Catherine said coolly. I asked about succession planning for financial services companies. Have you ever managed a CEO transition? Have you worked with boards of directors on leadership succession? Do you understand the regulatory requirements for succession planning in the financial services industry? Bradley's silence was deafening. Catherine turned back to Robert. This is exactly why I included the stability clause in our contract. Succession planning isn't generic business consulting, it's a highly specialized field that requires specific expertise and deep industry knowledge. Victoria has that expertise. This young man does not. But surely we can find a solution, Robert said desperately. Victoria is still with the company. She could work with Bradley to ensure continuity. Robert, let me explain something to you, Catherine said, her voice patient but firm. I'm 72 years old. I built Pinnacle Financial from a small, regional firm into a global powerhouse. I've seen every kind of corporate game, every kind of bait and switch, and every kind of excuse. What you've done to Victoria isn't just bad business, it's a betrayal of trust that makes me question your judgment and your integrity. She opened her briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents. These are formal termination notices, prepared by my legal team. Under the terms of our contract, Pinnacle Financial is terminating our agreement effective immediately. We're demanding the return of all fees paid to date, plus liquidated damages of $95 million. The silence in the room was absolute. I could hear the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic from the street below. Furthermore, Catherine continued, I've spoken with Rebecca Thompson at Meridian Industries and Michael Chong at Technova Solutions. Both companies have terminated their contracts with Morrison and Associates as of this morning. I believe the total damages across all three contracts exceed $200 million. Robert Morrison looked like he was about to be sick. Catherine, please. This is the end of our company. Surely we can find some way to work together. Catherine stood up, her lawyers following suit. Robert, the time for working together ended when you decided to humiliate the most talented consultant I've ever worked with. Victoria Hayes is a professional of the highest caliber, and treating her like a janitor is not only insulting to her, it's insulting to every client who trusted her with their most important business challenges. She looked at me, her expression softening. Victoria, I'm sorry you had to endure this. But I want you to know that your reputation in the industry remains intact. In fact, I'll be happy to provide references for your next position. As Catherine and her lawyers prepared to leave, Bradley made one final desperate attempt. Ms. Walsh, what if we reinstated Victoria to her original position? Would that change your decision? Catherine paused at the door and turned back to face him. Young man, there are some mistakes that can't be undone. You've shown your true character, and character is something that can't be changed with apologies or promises. Victoria deserves better than working for people who would betray her trust and humiliate her for their own gain. She looked at me one final time. Victoria, my offer stands. When you're ready to discuss your future, please call me. And with that, she walked out of the conference room, taking $320 million and the company's reputation with her. I sat there for a moment, looking around the table at the faces of my former colleagues. Bradley looked shell-shocked. Marcus and Jessica appeared to be in various stages of panic. Robert Morrison looked like a man who'd just watched his life's work collapse in real time. Well, I said, standing up and smoothing my janitor's uniform. I should get back to work. Those windows won't clean themselves. As I walked toward the door, I could hear Robert Morrison's voice behind me, desperate and pleading, Victoria, please. We need to talk. But I didn't turn around. I had windows to clean, and Morrison and Associates had 24 hours left to exist as a viable company. The countdown was nearly over. Wednesday morning arrived with an eerie quiet that felt like the calm before a storm. I put on my janitor's uniform for what I suspected would be the last time and drove to Morrison and Associates. Wondering what kind of chaos I would find when I arrived, the parking garage was nearly empty, unusual for a Wednesday morning. Most of the executive parking spots were vacant, and I noticed several for lease signs had appeared overnight on cars that belonged to junior staff members. Word was spreading quickly through the company that something catastrophic was happening. I took the elevator to the 15th floor and immediately sensed the change in atmosphere. The Morrison and Associates. Wondering what kind of chaos I would find when I arrived, the parking garage was nearly empty, unusual for a Wednesday morning. Most of the executive parking spots were vacant, and I noticed several for lease signs had appeared overnight on cars that belonged to junior staff members. Word was spreading quickly through the company that something catastrophic was happening. I took the elevator to the 15th floor and immediately sensed the change in atmosphere. The confident bustle of a successful consulting firm had been replaced by the hushed urgency of a company in crisis. Several offices were dark, and I could see people packing boxes through the glass walls. Miguel was waiting for me by the supply closet, his expression grim. Victoria, he said quietly, I don't think we're going to be cleaning much today. I've been here since 6 a.m., and it's been nothing but emergency meetings and phone calls. What have you heard? I asked, though I suspected I already knew. The board met until 3 a.m. last night. Half the executive team submitted resignation letters this morning. And there's a rumor that the company is filing for bankruptcy protection. I wasn't surprised. Losing $820 million in revenue while facing $200 million in damages was exactly the kind of financial catastrophe that destroyed companies overnight. But I was curious about the human cost of the decisions that had led to this moment. Where is everyone? I asked. Most of the senior staff are in the conference room with lawyers and accountants. The junior staff are either looking for new jobs or trying to figure out if they'll get paid for their final month of work. As we talked, I noticed unusual activity in the hallway. A woman in a navy suit was walking from office to office, accompanied by two men carrying boxes and legal documents. I recognized her as someone from the company's law firm. That's the liquidation team, Miguel explained. They're cataloging assets and preparing for the sale of company property. The reality of what was happening hit me with unexpected force. Morrison and Associates wasn't just losing clients, it was dying. 15 years of building relationships, developing expertise, and creating value for clients was being dismantled in real time because a group of insecure employees had decided to destroy the person who'd made their success possible. At 9:30 a.m., Patricia Wells appeared in the hallway, looking exhausted and defeated. She spotted me and walked over with slow, measured steps. "Victoria," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "Robert would like to speak with you. Would you mind coming to his office?" I followed her down the hallway, past the boxes and the liquidation team, to Robert Morrison's corner office. He was sitting behind his desk, but he looked like a shadow of the confident executive I'd known for 8 years. His hair was disheveled, his shirt wrinkled, and his eyes were red-rimmed from lack of sleep. "Victoria," he said as I entered, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "Please, sit down." I remained standing. "What can I do for you, Robert?" He looked up at me, and for the first time since I'd known him, I saw genuine vulnerability in his eyes. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Did you know this would happen when you called the clients on Monday?" I considered his question carefully. I knew that the clients would review their contracts and make decisions based on what they found. I knew that they valued continuity and trusted relationships. And I knew that they wouldn't be happy about being blindsided by a change in project leadership. "But did you know it would destroy the company?" "Robert, I negotiated those contracts to protect everyone involved, Morrison and Associates, the clients, and myself. The termination clauses were standard provisions that any experienced consultant would include. If you'd asked me about them, I would have explained how they worked and what they meant. But you didn't explain them to your team." "My team wasn't involved in the contract negotiations. They were responsible for research, analysis, and implementation support. The legal and financial details were above their pay grade." Robert slumped in his chair. "So we destroyed the company because we didn't understand what we were dealing with." "You destroyed the company because you chose to believe the worst about someone who had given you 8 years of loyal service and the best quarter in your company's history. You chose to humiliate me rather than trust me. And you chose to promote people who weren't qualified for the responsibilities they were taking on." "What can I do to fix this?" he asked, his voice desperate. "There's nothing you can do, Robert. The clients have made their decisions. The contracts are terminated. The damage is done. But what if I offered you a partnership? What if I gave you equity in the company?" "What if I—" "Robert," I interrupted, "what company? You're filing for bankruptcy. There's nothing left to offer." He was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. Then he looked up at me with the expression of a man who'd finally understood the magnitude of his mistake. "They were wrong about you, weren't they? Bradley, Marcus, Jessica, Amanda, they were wrong about everything." "Yes," I said simply. "They were wrong. And I was wrong to believe them." "Yes, you were." Robert opened his desk drawer and pulled out a thick folder. "These are the allegations they made against you. Accusations about unauthorized commitments, reckless negotiation tactics, and exposing the company to liability. I've spent the last 2 days reviewing every document, every email, every conversation record. Do you know what I found?" I waited. "Nothing. I found nothing to support any of their claims. Every decision you made was documented, every commitment you made was authorized, and every risk you took was calculated and appropriate. You were protecting the company, not undermining it. Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I owe you an apology, and I owe you the truth. What we did to you was wrong. It was based on jealousy, fear, and corporate politics rather than facts. And it's going to cost everyone their jobs." I felt a mixture of vindication and sadness. Vindication because I'd been right all along, and sadness because so many innocent people were going to suffer for the mistakes of a few ambitious employees. "Robert, I appreciate the apology. But it doesn't change what's happened." "I know. But I need you to know that I understand what we lost when we lost you. It wasn't just the contracts, it was the integrity, the expertise, and the trust that made this company successful." As he spoke, I could hear commotion in the hallway. Raised voices, the sound of boxes being moved, and what sounded like someone crying. The liquidation process was accelerating. "Victoria," Robert said, his voice getting quieter, "I have one more question. What are you going to do now?" I looked around his office, taking in the awards on the walls, the family photos on his desk, and the view of Seattle that I'd admired so many times over the years. This had been my professional home for 8 years, and now it was disappearing. Because of choices I'd had no control over. I'm going to finish my shift, I said. Miguel is counting on me to help with the cleaning, and I don't abandon my commitments. And after that? After that, I'm going to build something better. I turned to leave, but Robert's voice stopped me at the door. Victoria? For what it's worth, I'm proud of the way you've handled this. You had every right to be vindictive, to gloat, to make this worse for all of us. But you didn't. You've shown more class in the past 3 days than I've shown in the past 3 years. I looked back at him, this man who'd been my mentor and my boss, who'd given me opportunities and ultimately betrayed my trust. Robert, I learned a long time ago that revenge is a luxury I can't afford. I'm too busy building my future to waste time destroying my past. As I left his office, I could hear him on the phone, probably with lawyers or accountants, dealing with the practical aspects of corporate dissolution. The king of Morrison and Associates was presiding over the destruction of his own kingdom. I found Miguel in the supply closet, organizing cleaning materials that would probably be sold as part of the liquidation process. How did it go? He asked. He apologized. Too little, too late. Something like that. But Miguel, I want you to know, whatever happens next, you've been nothing but professional and kind to me. I won't forget that. He smiled sadly. Victoria, I've been watching you for 3 days. You're not really a janitor. Are you? No, I said, I'm not. But I learned something important from you about honest work and dignity. That's worth more than any contract I ever negotiated. As we stood there in the supply closet, surrounded by mops and cleaning solutions, I realized that the countdown was over. In 72 hours, Morrison and Associates had gone from celebrating the biggest success in company history to filing for bankruptcy. The betrayal was complete, the justice was served, and the future was mine to create, but first, I had windows to clean. Because I'd learned that keeping your commitments, all of them, is what separates professionals from pretenders. By noon on Wednesday, the 15th floor of Morrison and Associates looked like a crime scene. Boxes were stacked everywhere, employees were clearing out their desks, and the liquidation team had taken over the conference room to process the sale of company assets. I was cleaning the windows in the hallway when I noticed Bradley sitting alone in what used to be my office. He wasn't packing, he was just sitting there, staring at the desk where he'd imagined building his career on the foundation of my work. As I cleaned, I could see his reflection in the window glass. He looked like someone who'd been in a car accident, shocked, disoriented, and trying to process what had just happened to his life. The confident, ambitious young executive from Monday morning had been replaced by someone who understood, perhaps for the first time, that actions have consequences. I knocked on the door frame. Excuse me, I need to clean in here. He looked up at me, and I saw something I hadn't expected, genuine remorse. Victoria, he said quietly, could we talk for a minute? I wheeled my cleaning cart into the office and closed the door. What do you want to talk about, Bradley? He gestured to the chair across from the desk, the same chair where I'd sat for countless meetings, planning strategies and solving problems. I remained standing. I want to apologize, he said. I know it doesn't change anything, but I need you to know that I'm sorry. Sorry for what, specifically? He was quiet for a long moment, looking at his hands. For believing that I could take your place. For thinking that your success was somehow unfair to the rest of us. For convincing the others that you were the problem instead of recognizing that you were the solution. What made you think you could do my job? Arrogance, I guess. And jealousy. I watched you work with these high-level clients, and I thought it looked easy. I thought it was just about having the right connections and saying the right things. I didn't understand how much expertise and relationship building went into what you did. I continued cleaning while he talked, wiping down surfaces and organizing the items he'd brought to replace my personal belongings. Bradley, do you know what the most expensive part of this whole situation is? The damages from the terminated contracts? No. The most expensive part is the loss of trust. It took me 8 years to build relationships with clients like Catherine Walsh, Rebecca Thompson, and Michael Chong. Those relationships were worth more than any single contract because they represented ongoing business, referrals, and reputation. When you destroyed my career, you destroyed those relationships too. He looked up at me, and I could see that he was beginning to understand the true scope of what he'd done. I thought I was protecting the company, he said. I thought you were taking too many risks, making promises we couldn't keep. What risks did I take that you wouldn't have taken? I don't know. That's the problem, I don't know enough about what you do to make those judgments. But I was afraid that if you failed, it would reflect badly on all of us. So you decided to make me fail instead? I decided to make sure I wasn't responsible for your failure. I wanted to distance myself from the risk. I stopped cleaning and looked at him directly. Bradley, that's not how leadership works. Leadership means taking responsibility for successes and failures. It means supporting your team members when they're taking calculated risks to achieve extraordinary results. It means having the courage to trust people who know more than you do. I know that now. But I learned it too late. What are you going to do now? I don't know. The company is gone. My reputation is destroyed. I don't think anyone in the industry will hire me after this. My father's company collapsed because of decisions I influenced, and he's lost everything he spent 15 years building. For the first time since this whole ordeal began, I felt something approaching sympathy for Bradley. He was young, ambitious, and had made catastrophic mistakes driven by fear and insecurity. But he was also genuinely remorseful, and that was more than I could say for some of the others. Bradley, can I give you some advice? He nodded. Don't try to rebuild your career in consulting. You don't have the temperament for it, and you don't have the experience to work with high-stakes clients. Find something else, something that matches your actual skills and interests. And when you do, remember this lesson: never sabotage someone who's trying to help you succeed. What about you? What are you going to do? I finished cleaning the last window and turned to face him. I'm going to do what I should have done years ago. I'm going to start my own firm. Won't that be difficult without the resources of a larger company? Bradley, I don't need the resources of a larger company. I need the trust of clients who value expertise and integrity. And I have something that Morrison & Associates never had, a reputation for putting client interests ahead of corporate politics. As I prepared to leave the office, Bradley spoke one more time. Victoria, I know I don't have the right to ask this, but if you ever need someone to do research or analysis for your new firm, I'd be willing to work for free. I know I don't deserve it, but I'd like the chance to learn how to do this work properly. I paused at the door. Bradley, I appreciate the offer, but I think you need to find your own path. Working for me wouldn't be good for either of us. I understand. But thank you for listening to me. And thank you for not making this harder than it already is. As I left the office, I reflected on the conversation. Bradley's apology wouldn't bring back Morrison & Associates or undo the damage to innocent employees who'd lost their jobs. But it did represent something important: the acknowledgement that ambition without integrity is ultimately self-destructive. I found Miguel in the break room, packing up the last of the cleaning supplies. How are you doing? I asked. I'll be fine. I've been in facilities management for 20 years, and there's always demand for good cleaning services. But I'm worried about some of the other staff, the administrative assistants, the junior analysts, the people who don't have specialized skills or extensive networks. What about Marcus, Jessica, and Amanda? Marcus is interviewing at other consulting firms, but word is getting out about what happened here. Jessica is thinking about going back to school for a different degree. Amanda is looking at corporate communications roles. And they're all having trouble finding work. Let's just say that being associated with the collapse of Morrison & Associates isn't exactly a selling point on a resume. I thought about my former teammates, people I'd invested time and energy in developing, who'd repaid that investment with betrayal. I should have felt satisfied that they were facing consequences for their actions. Instead, I felt tired and sad. Miguel, I want to ask you something. Would you be interested in working for a new consulting firm? I'm going to need someone who understands operations, who pays attention to details, and who treats people with respect. His face lit up. Are you serious? I'm very serious. I can't pay much at first, but I can offer you equity and the chance to grow with the company. Victoria, I'd be honored to work with you. But are you sure you want to hire a janitor for a consulting firm? I smiled. Miguel, I've learned that the most important qualities in business are reliability, integrity, and respect for other people. You have all of those qualities. Everything else can be taught. As we finished packing the cleaning supplies, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. 3 days ago, I'd been a successful senior business development manager, riding high on the biggest contracts in company history. Now I was an unemployed janitor planning to start my own consulting firm, but I'd also learned something valuable about resilience. About the difference between real success and superficial achievement, and about the power that comes from refusing to let other people's failures define your future. The countdown was over. Morrison & Associates was finished. And my real career was just beginning. Thursday morning, I woke up in my apartment and realized I had nowhere to go. For the first time in 8 years, I wasn't expected at Morrison & Associates. The company had officially filed for bankruptcy protection the previous evening, and all employees had been terminated effective immediately. I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table with my laptop, surrounded by the boxes I'd carried home from my former office. But instead of feeling lost or defeated, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete freedom. For 8 years, I'd been building other people's dreams, making other people's companies successful, and helping other people achieve their goals. Now, for the first time, I could focus entirely on my own vision. I opened my laptop and began drafting a business plan for Hayes Strategic Consulting. Not because I needed one for investors or lenders, I had enough savings to fund the startup myself, but because I needed to clarify my own thinking about what kind of company I wanted to build. The principles were simple: expertise over politics, relationships over transactions, and integrity over profit. I would work with fewer clients but provide deeper value. I would hire people based on character and capability, not connections or credentials. And I would never, ever allow the kind of toxic culture that had destroyed Morrison and Associates to take root in my organization. At 10 a.m., my phone rang. It was Catherine Walsh. "Victoria, I hope I'm not calling too early. I wanted to follow up on our conversation about your future plans." "Not at all, Catherine. I was just working on those plans, actually." "Excellent. I have a proposition for you. Pinnacle Financial needs a succession planning consultant, and I'd like to offer you the contract directly, not through Morrison and Associates, but through your own firm." I nearly dropped my coffee cup. "Catherine, I don't have a firm yet. I'm just starting to put together a business plan." "How long would it take you to establish a consulting practice?" "Legally? I could have the paperwork filed within a week. Practically? I'd need some time to set up office space, hire staff, and establish operating procedures." "What if I told you that you could work from temporary office space in the Pinnacle building while you're getting established? And what if I told you that I have 2 other CEOs who are interested in working with you on succession planning projects?" I sat back in my chair, overwhelmed by the sudden shift in my circumstances. "Catherine, that's incredibly generous, but I have to ask, why are you doing this?" "Because good people are hard to find, and you're very good people. Also, because I believe in supporting entrepreneurs who have the courage to build something better after they've been betrayed by something worse." "What would be the terms of the contract?" "The same terms we negotiated with Morrison and Associates, but with one important difference: you'll be working directly for me, not for some junior executive who doesn't understand the complexity of what we're trying to accomplish." I thought about the irony of the situation. The contract that had destroyed Morrison and Associates was about to become the foundation for my own company. "Catherine, I accept your offer. But I need to be transparent about something. I've asked Miguel Rodriguez, who worked in facilities management at Morrison and Associates, to join me as an operations manager. He's not a traditional consultant, but he has the qualities I value most in business partners." "Victoria, if you think he's the right person for the job, that's good enough for me. Some of the best business decisions I've made have involved hiring people who didn't have traditional qualifications but had the right character and work ethic." After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen staring at my laptop screen. In one phone call, I'd gone from unemployed janitor to CEO of my own consulting firm with a Fortune 500 client and guaranteed office space, but the real transformation wasn't in my professional circumstances, it was in my understanding of what success actually meant. 3 days ago, I'd measured success by the size of my contracts, the prestige of my clients, and the recognition of my colleagues. Now I understood that real success was about having the freedom to work with people you respect, on projects that matter, according to principles you believe in. I called Miguel and told him about Catherine's offer. His response was immediate and enthusiastic. "Victoria, I can't believe this is happening. A week ago, I was a janitor teaching you how to clean windows. Now you're offering me a partnership in a consulting firm." "Miguel, let me be clear about something: this isn't charity. I'm offering you this opportunity because I believe you have the skills and judgment to help build something special. But it's going to be hard work, and there's no guarantee of success." "I understand. But I'd rather take the risk of failing with someone I respect than play it safe with people I don't trust." We agreed to meet on Friday to discuss the details of our partnership and to begin planning the launch of Hayes Strategic Consulting. That afternoon, I received another unexpected call, this one from Rebecca Thompson at Meridian Industries. "Victoria, I heard about what happened at Morrison and Associates. I'm sorry you had to go through that, but I'm not sorry that you're free to work independently now." "Thank you, Rebecca. That means a lot coming from you. I'm calling because Meridian needs a consultant who can help us with our integration project. We terminated our contract with Morrison and Associates, but we still have the same challenges we had before. Would you be interested in working with us directly?" "Absolutely. But I should mention that I'm just starting my own firm, so I don't have a large team or extensive resources." "Victoria, I don't need a large team. I need someone Who understands my business and can deliver results. Based on our previous conversations, you're exactly what I'm looking for. The terms she offered were even more favorable than the original Morrison and Associates contract, with a higher fee structure and more flexible timeline. By the end of the day, I had 2 major clients, a business partner, and the beginnings of a company that would be built on the foundation of trust and expertise rather than politics and manipulation. That evening, I called my parents to tell them what had happened. So let me understand this correctly, my mother said. You were betrayed by your colleagues, demoted to janitor, and now you're starting your own company with better clients and more money than you had before? That's essentially correct. And you're not angry about what they did to you? I thought about her question. I was angry. But I'm not angry anymore. I'm grateful. Grateful? For being betrayed and humiliated. Grateful for learning who I could trust and who I couldn't. Grateful for discovering that I had the strength to survive something that felt like it would destroy me. And grateful for the opportunity to build something better than what I had before. My father, ever the engineer, focused on the practical implications. Victoria, starting a consulting firm is risky. Most small businesses fail within the first few years. Are you sure you're ready for that kind of responsibility? Dad, I've spent the last 3 days learning that the biggest risk in business isn't failure, it's trusting the wrong people. I'd rather fail building something I believe in than succeed working for people who don't value integrity. As I hung up the phone, I reflected on the transformation that had occurred over the past 4 days. I'd gone from victim to entrepreneur, from employee to owner, from someone who depended on others for opportunities to someone who created opportunities for others. The betrayal that was supposed to destroy me had instead freed me to become who I was always meant to be. And that was worth more than any contract I'd ever negotiated. 6 months later, I stood in the conference room of Hayes Strategic Consulting, looking out at the Seattle skyline from our offices on the 20th floor of the Pinnacle Financial Building. The view was better than the one I'd had at Morrison and Associates, but more importantly, everything I could see from that window belonged to something I'd built myself. The company had grown faster than I'd ever imagined possible. What started as a desperate attempt to salvage my career had become a thriving consulting practice with 8 employees, 12 active clients, and a reputation for excellence that extended far beyond the Pacific Northwest. Miguel walked into the conference room carrying a stack of project files, his transformation as remarkable as my own. In 6 months, he'd gone from facilities management to operations director, and he'd proven to be one of the most naturally gifted business minds I'd ever encountered. His attention to detail, his ability to anticipate problems, and his genuine respect for people had made him invaluable to our clients. The quarterly reports are ready for your review, he said, setting the files on the conference table. And I have some news about Morrison and Associates. I looked up from the strategic planning documents I'd been reviewing. What kind of news? They've officially closed. The bankruptcy proceedings are complete, and the assets have been liquidated. Robert Morrison is working as a freelance consultant, but he's struggling to find clients. Most of the industry knows what happened. I felt a mixture of sadness and vindication. Morrison and Associates had been my professional home for 8 years, and despite everything that had happened, I'd invested too much of myself in that company to feel entirely satisfied by its demise. What about the others? Marcus found a position with a smaller firm in Portland, but he's making about half what he was making before. Jessica went back to school to study data science. Apparently she decided that consulting wasn't for her. Amanda is working in corporate communications for a tech startup. And Bradley? Miguel's expression grew more serious. He's been blacklisted from the consulting industry. Word got out about his role in the Morrison and Associates collapse, and no one wants to hire him. Last I heard, he was considering a career change. I thought about Bradley's offer to work for free, his genuine remorse, and his recognition that he'd made catastrophic mistakes driven by fear and ambition. There was a lesson in his downfall about the long-term consequences of short-term thinking. Miguel, I want to ask you something. If Bradley approached us looking for a job, what would you recommend? He considered the question carefully. I think he learned something important from what happened, but I also think he needs to prove himself somewhere else first. Maybe in a few years, if he's demonstrated that he's changed, we could consider it. But not now. I nodded. Miguel's judgment had proven reliable in all matters related to personnel and operations. If he thought Bradley wasn't ready, then Bradley wasn't ready. What about our current projects? I asked. The Pinnacle succession planning is ahead of schedule. Catherine Walsh is extremely pleased with the progress, and she's already recommended us to 3 other Fortune 500 CEOs. The Meridian integration is going smoothly. Rebecca Thompson says it's the best consulting experience she's ever had. And the Technova cultural transformation is exceeding all expectations. The irony wasn't lost on me. The 3 clients who'd terminated their contracts with Morrison and Associates had become the foundation clients for Hayes Strategic Consulting. Their loyalty hadn't been to the company, it had been to me personally, and that loyalty had survived the transition. Any challenges I should know about? Just one. We're getting more client requests than we can handle. I've turned down 6 potential projects in the past month because we don't have the capacity to deliver the level of service our clients expect. It was a good problem to have, but it was still a problem. I'd built Hayes Strategic Consulting on the principle of providing exceptional value to a limited number of clients rather than trying to serve everyone. But growth required balancing that principle with the practical need to expand our capabilities. What do you think we should do? I think we should hire 3 more consultants, but only if we can find people who share our values and meet our standards. Better to turn down business than to compromise our reputation. Miguel had learned quickly that in consulting, reputation was everything. One bad project could destroy years of relationship building, and one incompetent employee could undermine the trust that clients placed in our entire organization. Do you have any candidates in mind? Actually, I do. There's a senior consultant at McKinsey who's been following our work. She's interested in joining a smaller firm where she can have more direct client contact and more influence over strategic decisions. And there are 2 junior consultants from other firms who've approached us about opportunities. Set up interviews. But remember, we're not just hiring consultants. We're hiring partners. Everyone who works here needs to understand that their success depends on everyone else's success. As Miguel left to arrange the interviews, I reflected on how much had changed in 6 months. I'd gone from being a victim of corporate betrayal to being the CEO of a company that was built on the principles I'd always believed in but had never been able to fully implement. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Catherine Walsh. Victoria, I have a proposition for you. The CEO of Meridian Industries is retiring, and they're looking for someone to help them identify and develop his successor. Rebecca Thompson recommended you specifically. The contract would be worth $15 million over 2 years. I smiled. 6 months ago, a $15 million contract would have been the highlight of my career. Now it was just another opportunity to help a client solve a complex challenge. Catherine, I'm honored by the recommendation. When would they need an answer? By the end of the week. But Victoria, I should mention that there's another consulting firm competing for this contract. They're offering a lower price and promising a faster timeline. What firm? A new company called Morrison Strategic Solutions. I believe it's run by some of the former employees from Morrison and Associates. I felt my stomach tighten. Marcus, Jessica, and Amanda had apparently decided to start their own firm, using the Morrison name and presumably trading on whatever remained of the company's reputation. Have you met with them? I have. They made a very professional presentation, and they seem to understand the client's needs. But they lack the experience and track record that you've established. Catherine, I appreciate your confidence in me, but I want you to know that I'm not interested in competing on price or timeline. I'm interested in delivering the best possible results for the client. If Morrison Strategic Solutions can do that better than we can, then they should get the contract. Victoria, that's exactly why I want to work with you. You understand that the goal isn't to win contracts, it's to solve problems and create value for clients. After we hung up, I sat in my office thinking about the strange circular nature of business relationships. The people who'd betrayed me were now my competitors, using the name of the company they'd destroyed to build their own careers. In some ways, it was poetic justice. They'd always wanted to take credit for my work, and now they were literally trying to do exactly that, but I wasn't interested in revenge anymore. I was interested in building something better than what had come before, something that would outlast the petty jealousies and political maneuvering that had destroyed Morrison and Associates. I called Miguel back into my office. I need you to prepare a proposal for the Meridian Succession Planning Project, I said. But I want you to know that we're competing against Morrison Strategic Solutions. The team from Morrison and Associates? That's right. Marcus, Jessica, and Amanda have apparently started their own firm. Miguel was quiet for a moment. How do you feel about that? I feel like it's proof that good ideas eventually find their way to the right people. They learned something from working with me, and now they're trying to apply those lessons to their own business. I hope they succeed. You really mean that? I really do. But I also hope we succeed more. Miguel smiled. I'll get started on the proposal right away. And Victoria? I think we're going to win this one. Why? Because we're not just selling consulting services. We're selling trust, integrity, and the promise that we'll put the client's interests ahead of our own. That's not something you can fake or copy. It's something you either have or you don't. As Miguel left to begin work on the proposal, I looked out at the Seattle skyline again. Somewhere in that city, my former colleagues were building their own consulting firm, probably using techniques and strategies they'd learned from watching me work. In another part of the city, Bradley Morrison was trying to rebuild his career after the spectacular failure of his attempted coup, but I wasn't thinking about any of them. I was thinking about the future, about the clients we could help, the problems we could solve, and the company we could build based on principles that would outlast any individual personality or corporate structure. 6 months ago, I'd been a janitor in a company that was collapsing because of betrayal and incompetence. Now I was the CEO of a company that was thriving because of trust and expertise. The transformation was complete, but the real work was just beginning. The presentation to Meridian Industries was scheduled for the following Tuesday. I spent the weekend preparing, not because I was nervous about the competition, but because I wanted to deliver the best possible proposal for a client who deserved nothing less than excellence. Miguel and I worked late into Sunday evening, refining our approach and ensuring that every detail of our succession planning strategy was thoroughly documented. We'd learned from our experience with other clients that the most important factor in successful succession planning wasn't just identifying the right candidate, it was creating a transition process that preserved institutional knowledge while allowing for strategic innovation. Are you concerned about competing against Morrison's strategic solutions? Miguel asked as we reviewed the final draft of our proposal. Concerned? No. Curious? Absolutely. I'm interested to see what they've learned from the Morrison and Associates experience and how they're applying those lessons to their own business. Do you think they'll try to use insider knowledge about your methods? I considered his question. Miguel, everything I know about consulting I learned from books, training programs, and years of experience working with clients. There's no secret sauce, no proprietary methodology that can't be replicated. The difference between good consultants and great consultants isn't what they know, it's how they apply what they know to solve specific problems for specific clients. So you're not worried about them copying your approach? I'm worried about them copying my approach badly. If they try to use techniques they don't fully understand, they could damage the client's business. That's not good for anyone. On Monday morning, I received a call from Rebecca Thompson, who would be sitting in on the presentations as part of Meridian's evaluation committee. Victoria, I wanted to give you a heads up about tomorrow's meeting. The team from Morrison Strategic Solutions presented last week, and they made a very polished presentation. What was your impression? Professionally? They clearly understand the technical aspects of succession planning. They've done their homework, and they've put together a comprehensive proposal. And personally? Rebecca was quiet for a moment. Personally, I found their presentation to be very similar to the approach you outlined when we first discussed the Meridian integration project. Almost too similar. I felt a knot form in my stomach. What do you mean? I mean they used some of the same phrases, the same analytical frameworks, and the same implementation strategies that you'd shared with us during our previous conversations. It felt like they were trying to replicate your methodology without fully understanding the reasoning behind it. This was exactly what I'd been afraid of. Marcus, Jessica, and Amanda had observed my work closely enough to copy the surface elements of my approach, but they didn't have the depth of experience to understand why those elements worked or how to adapt them to different situations. Rebecca, I appreciate you telling me this. But I want to be clear, I'm not asking you to choose us because of our history together. I'm asking you to choose the consultant who can deliver the best results for Meridian. I understand, Victoria. And I want you to know that's exactly what we're going to do. Tuesday morning, Miguel and I arrived at Meridian Industries 30 minutes early. The conference room was impressive, a modern space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Chicago, equipped with state-of-the-art presentation technology and comfortable seating for 12 people. As we set up our materials, I noticed a folder on the conference table labeled Morrison Strategic Solutions Proposal. I didn't look inside, but I could see that it was thick and professionally bound, indicating that they'd put significant effort into their presentation. At 10 a.m. The evaluation committee filed into the conference room. Rebecca Thompson was there, along with 5 other Meridian executives I'd met during previous projects, plus 2 board members I didn't recognize. The committee chair, Meridian's chief operating officer, introduced us to the group and explained the evaluation process. We would have 90 minutes to present our approach, followed by 30 minutes of questions. I began with a brief overview of Hayes Strategic Consulting and our philosophy of succession planning. Rather than focusing on our credentials or track record, I emphasized our belief that successful succession required understanding the unique culture and strategic challenges of each organization. Succession planning isn't a one-size-fits-all process, I explained. What works for a technology startup won't necessarily work for a manufacturing company. What works for a family-owned business won't necessarily work for a publicly traded corporation. Our approach is to first understand what makes Meridian unique, then develop a succession strategy that preserves your strengths while addressing your specific challenges. I spent the next hour walking through our proposed methodology, using case studies from other clients to illustrate key concepts while being careful not to reveal any confidential information. Miguel contributed technical details about timeline management and stakeholder communication, demonstrating the depth of expertise we could bring to the project. During the question and answer session, one of the board members asked about our approach to candidate evaluation. How do you determine whether someone has the leadership qualities necessary to run a complex organization like Meridian? He asked. We use a combination of structured interviews, behavioral assessments, and practical simulations, I replied. But the most important factor is alignment with the organization's values and strategic vision. Technical skills can be developed, but character and judgment are much harder to change. Another committee member asked about our timeline for completing the project. We believe this process should take 18 to 24 months, Miguel explained. Succession planning that's rushed is succession planning that fails. We'd rather take the time to get it right than deliver a quick solution that doesn't work. As we packed up our materials after the presentation, Rebecca walked over to speak with us privately. That was an excellent presentation, she said. You clearly understand what we need, and you've demonstrated that you can deliver it. Thank you, Rebecca. When will you be making your decision? The committee will meet tomorrow morning, and we'll have an answer by the end of the week. But Victoria, I want you to know that regardless of the outcome, I've been impressed by how you've handled this entire process. You've been professional, thorough, and focused entirely on what's best for Meridian. That's the only way I know how to work. As Miguel and I left the Meridian building, I felt good about our presentation. We'd been honest about our approach, realistic about our timeline, and focused on delivering value rather than just winning the contract. What do you think? Miguel asked as we walked to our car. I think we did our best. If that's good enough, we'll get the contract. If it's not, then Morrison Strategic Solutions probably deserves it more than we do. Are you really that philosophical about it? Miguel, 6 months ago I was cleaning windows in a janitor's uniform while my career collapsed around me. Today I'm the CEO of a successful consulting firm competing for a $15 million contract. I've learned that focusing on things you can control is much more productive than worrying about things you can't. Thursday afternoon, Rebecca called with the committee's decision. Victoria, I'm pleased to inform you that Meridian Industries has selected Hayes Strategic Consulting for our succession planning project. The contract will be for $15 million over 2 years, with the possibility of extension if additional services are needed. I felt a surge of satisfaction, not because we'd beaten Morrison Strategic Solutions, but because we'd earned the trust of a client who had high standards and significant options. Rebecca, we're honored by your confidence in us. We'll do everything in our power to exceed your expectations. I know you will. And Victoria? I want you to know that the decision was unanimous. Every member of the evaluation committee agreed that Hayes Strategic Consulting was the right choice for Meridian. What made the difference? 2 things. First, your approach was more thoughtful and comprehensive than the competition. Second, we trust you. That might sound simple, but in consulting, trust is everything. After I hung up, I sat in my office thinking about the conversation. Trust was indeed everything in consulting, and it was something that couldn't be faked, copied, or manufactured. It had to be earned through consistent performance, honest communication, and putting client interests ahead of personal gain. Morrison Strategic Solutions had tried to compete by copying my methods, but they'd missed the most important element of successful consulting, the relationships built on integrity and mutual respect that made everything else possible. I called Miguel into my office to share the good news. We won, I said simply. I knew we would. But how do you feel about it? I feel like we're building something that will last. Not just a successful business, but a reputation for excellence that will outlive any individual project or client relationship. And what about Morrison Strategic Solutions? I hope they learn from this experience and become better consultants. Competition makes everyone better, and the industry benefits when there are more firms committed to delivering real value to clients. Miguel smiled. You really have moved on from what happened at Morrison and Associates, haven't you? Completely. I'm not interested in looking backward anymore. I'm too busy building the future. As Miguel left to begin preparing for the Meridian project, I looked out my office window at the Seattle skyline. Somewhere in that city, Marcus, Jessica, and Amanda were probably disappointed about losing the contract, but hopefully they were also learning important lessons about the difference Between copying someone's methods and understanding their principles, the competition had been good for everyone involved. We'd delivered our best work, they'd been forced to elevate their game, and Meridian had benefited from having multiple qualified options to choose from, but most importantly, I'd proven to myself that Hayes Strategic Consulting wasn't just a reaction to betrayal, it was a genuine improvement on everything I'd learned during my years in the industry. The transformation was complete, and the future was ours to create. 3 weeks after winning the Meridian contract, I was having lunch at a quiet cafe in downtown Seattle when I saw a familiar figure sitting alone at a corner table. It was Marcus, looking substantially different from the confident analyst I'd known at Morrison & Associates. His expensive suit had been replaced by business casual attire, and he had the slightly worn appearance of someone who'd been working long hours under significant stress. He looked up as I approached, and I could see a mixture of emotions cross his face: surprise, embarrassment, and something that might have been relief. "Victoria," he said, standing awkwardly. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Marcus. How are you doing?" "I'm Munagin. Would you like to sit down? I know this is probably awkward, but I'd like to talk to you if you have a few minutes." I sat across from him, curious about what he wanted to discuss. The last time we'd spoken, he'd been sitting in a conference room accusing me of making unauthorized commitments and exposing Morrison & Associates to liability. "I heard about Morrison Strategic Solutions," I said. "How's the new firm working out?" He grimaced. "It's been challenging. We're learning that starting a consulting practice is much harder than we thought it would be." "What kind of challenges?" "Client development, mostly. We assumed that our experience at Morrison & Associates would be enough to attract clients, but we're finding that most potential clients want to work with consultants who have proven track records of success. Our association with the Morrison & Associates collapse has made that difficult." I wasn't surprised. The consulting industry was small, and word traveled fast about firms that failed to deliver results. Marcus, Jessica, and Amanda had the misfortune of being associated with one of the most spectacular consulting failures in recent memory. "What about the Meridian succession planning project?" I asked. "I heard you competed for that contract." Marcus's expression grew more pained. "We did. We put together what we thought was a strong proposal, but we didn't get the contract." "Any feedback on why?" Rebecca Thompson said our approach was too derivative. She felt like we were trying to copy someone else's methodology without fully understanding it. I felt a mixture of sympathy and vindication. "Marcus, can I ask you something? When you were putting together that proposal, did you feel confident that you understood the succession planning process well enough to deliver results for Meridian?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Honestly? No. We were trying to reverse engineer the approach we'd seen you use with other clients, but we didn't have the depth of experience to adapt it to Meridian's specific situation." "Then why did you submit the proposal?" "Because we needed the business. Morrison Strategic Solutions has been operating at a loss for 6 months, and we're running out of capital. We thought that if we could win one major contract, it would give us the credibility we needed to attract other clients." I understood the logic, but I also saw the fundamental flaw in their strategy. They were trying to build a business based on copying someone else's success rather than developing their own expertise and reputation. "Marcus, can I give you some advice?" "I'd appreciate it." "Stop trying to be Hayes Strategic Consulting. Stop trying to be Morrison & Associates. Figure out what Morrison Strategic Solutions does better than anyone else, and build your business around that." "What do you mean?" "I mean that you, Jessica, and Amanda have skills and experience that are valuable, but you're not going to succeed by trying to replicate what I do. You need to find your own niche, your own approach, your own value proposition." Marcus leaned back in his chair. "Victoria, I have to ask, why are you giving me advice? After what we did to you, you'd have every right to want us to fail." I thought about his question. 6 months ago, I probably would have wanted them to fail. The betrayal had been so complete, so devastating, that revenge had seemed like the only appropriate response. "Marcus, I've learned something important over the past year. Success isn't about defeating other people, it's about building something valuable that helps clients solve important problems. If Morrison Strategic Solutions can do that, then the industry benefits and clients benefit. That's more important than any personal grievance I might have." "But don't you feel like we betrayed you?" "You did betray me. But holding on to that betrayal doesn't help me build my business or serve my clients. I'm much more interested in focusing on the future than relitigating the past." Marcus was quiet for several minutes, staring at his coffee cup. When he looked up, there were tears in his eyes. "Victoria, I need to tell you something. The allegations we made against you at Morrison & Associates, they were false. We knew they were false when we made them. I felt my stomach tighten. What do you mean? I mean we fabricated evidence to make it look like you were making unauthorized commitments and exposing the company to liability. We recorded conversations out of context, edited email exchanges, and created documentation that supported our narrative. The confession hit me like a physical blow. I'd suspected that the allegations were based on misunderstandings or misinterpretations, but I'd never imagined that they were completely fabricated. Why? I asked quietly. Because we were afraid. You were so successful, so confident, so capable of handling clients and challenges that we couldn't even understand. We felt like we were becoming irrelevant, like you were going to outgrow us and leave us behind. So you decided to destroy my career instead? We decided to protect our own careers. We convinced ourselves that you were a threat to the company and that removing you was necessary for everyone's survival. I sat back in my chair, trying to process what he was telling me. The betrayal had been even worse than I'd realized. It wasn't just professional jealousy or misguided ambition, it was deliberate, calculated fraud. Does Robert Morrison know this? I don't know. We never told him directly, but I suspect he figured it out after the company collapsed. The timeline was too obvious. We make allegations against you, you're removed from client projects, clients terminate their contracts, and the company fails within a week. What about Bradley? Bradley orchestrated the whole thing. He convinced us that you were planning to leave Morrison and Associates and start your own firm, and that you were going to steal all the clients when you left. He said we needed to act first to protect the company. I thought about Bradley's apology, his apparent remorse, and his offer to work for free. Had that been genuine, or just another manipulation? Marcus, why are you telling me this now? Because I can't live with the guilt anymore. What we did was wrong, and it destroyed not just your career but the careers of dozens of innocent people who worked at Morrison and Associates. I need you to know that I'm sorry, and I need you to know that you didn't deserve what happened to you. I looked at Marcus, this man who'd been my colleague, my mentee, and ultimately my betrayer, and I felt something I hadn't expected: pity. He'd allowed fear and insecurity to drive him to destroy something good, and he'd spent the past year living with the consequences of that decision. Marcus, I appreciate your apology. But I need you to understand something: I'm not going to use this information to hurt you or Morrison's strategic solutions. I'm not interested in revenge or in relitigating what happened. Why not? We destroyed your career based on lies. You didn't destroy my career. You destroyed my job at Morrison and Associates. There's a difference. My career is stronger now than it's ever been, and I'm building something better than what I had before. But we could have destroyed everything. If those clients hadn't trusted you enough to work with you independently, you could have lost everything. But they did trust me, and I didn't lose everything. Marcus, I've learned that the most important thing in business isn't protecting yourself from betrayal, it's building relationships strong enough to survive betrayal. Marcus wiped his eyes and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Victoria, I know I don't have the right to ask this, but is there any chance you might consider hiring me? I know I don't deserve it, but I've learned a lot from this experience, and I think I could be a valuable contributor to Hayes Strategic Consulting. I considered his request. Marcus was talented, he was genuinely remorseful, and he clearly understood the magnitude of his mistakes. But he was also someone who'd proven capable of elaborate deception when his self-interest was threatened. Marcus, I appreciate your honesty, and I'm glad you've learned from this experience. But I don't think hiring you would be good for either of us. You need to rebuild your career on your own terms, and I need to work with people I can trust completely. I understand. But if you ever change your mind, I hope you'll consider giving me a chance to prove that I've changed. I will. But for now, focus on making Morrison Strategic Solutions successful. Find your own niche, develop your own expertise, and build your own reputation. The industry is big enough for both of us. As I left the cafe, I reflected on the strange circular nature of the conversation. Marcus had confessed to betraying me, apologized for the fabricated allegations, and asked for a job, all in the span of 30 minutes. It was a reminder that people were capable of both tremendous cruelty and genuine remorse, sometimes within the same individual, but more importantly, it was confirmation that I'd made the right choice in focusing on building rather than destroying. While Marcus, Jessica, and Amanda had spent the past year struggling with the consequences of their betrayal, I'd been creating something valuable, something sustainable, something that would outlast any individual grudge or grievance. The transformation was complete, and the future was brighter than ever. 1 year after the collapse of Morrison and Associates, I received an unexpected phone call that would bring everything full circle. It was from a bankruptcy attorney representing the estate of the defunct company. Ms. Hayes, I'm calling regarding the final liquidation of Morrison and Associates assets. We've discovered some financial irregularities that we believe may have contributed to the company's collapse, and we'd like to discuss potential legal action. I was sitting in my office at Hayes Strategic Consulting, reviewing quarterly reports that showed our continued growth and success. The irony of the timing wasn't lost on me. Just as I was celebrating our achievements, the ghost of Morrison and Associates was reaching out from the grave. What kind of irregularities? I asked. We found evidence that several employees fabricated documentation to support false allegations against you. These fabrications appear to have been instrumental in the decisions that led to the termination of major client contracts. The estate may have grounds for recovery of damages based on employee misconduct. I felt a familiar knot in my stomach. What exactly are you asking me to do? We'd like you to testify about your experience at Morrison and Associates, particularly regarding the circumstances of your demotion and the subsequent client terminations. Your testimony could be crucial in establishing the causal relationship between the fabricated allegations and the company's financial losses. I thought about Marcus's confession at the cafe, his tears, and his admission that the allegations had been completely false. Now that confession was about to become part of a legal proceeding that could have serious consequences for everyone involved. Who would be held liable in this legal action? Potentially Marcus Chen, Jessica Park, Amanda Rodriguez, and Bradley Morrison. The estate's position is that their actions constituted fraud that directly caused the company's collapse. I sat back in my chair, processing the implications. The people who'd betrayed me were about to face serious legal consequences for their actions. A year ago, I would have felt vindicated, perhaps even eager to see them held accountable. Now, I felt something different, a sense of responsibility for what happened next. I need some time to consider this, I said. When do you need an answer? We're filing the action next week, but we could proceed without your testimony if necessary. However, your cooperation would strengthen our case significantly. After hanging up, I called Miguel into my office to discuss the situation. They want you to testify against Marcus, Jessica, Amanda, and Bradley, he asked. They want me to testify about what happened at Morrison and Associates. The testimony would likely implicate all of them in fraud charges. Are you going to do it? I thought about the question. Miguel, what do you think I should do? I think you should tell the truth. If they committed fraud, they should be held accountable. But I also think you should consider what's best for you and for Hayes Strategic Consulting. What do you mean? I mean that getting involved in a lawsuit against your former colleagues could create negative publicity for our firm. Clients might worry about confidentiality, about working with someone who's willing to testify against former employees. It could damage our reputation. Miguel was right. The consulting industry was built on trust and confidentiality. If potential clients believed that I might testify against them in legal proceedings, it could undermine the relationships that made our business possible. On the other hand, Miguel continued, if you don't testify, and the truth comes out anyway, it might look like you were protecting people who committed fraud. That could also damage our reputation. I spent the weekend thinking about the decision. On Sunday evening, I called Catherine Walsh to get her perspective. Victoria, this is a difficult situation, she said after I explained the circumstances. From a purely legal standpoint, you have an obligation to tell the truth if you're subpoenaed. From a business standpoint, you need to consider the long-term implications for Hayes Strategic Consulting. What would you do in my situation? I'd probably testify, but I'd be very careful about how I framed my testimony. Focus on the facts. Avoid speculation about motives, and emphasize your commitment to moving forward rather than relitigating the past. Do you think it would affect our business relationship? Not at all. If anything, it would reinforce my confidence in your integrity. The fact that you're struggling with this decision tells me that you're someone who takes responsibility seriously. On Monday morning, I called the bankruptcy attorney. I'll testify, I said. But I want to be clear about something. I'm not interested in pursuing a vendetta against my former colleagues. I'll tell the truth about what happened, but I won't speculate about their motives or recommend specific legal actions. That's all we need, Ms. Hayes. Your testimony about the fabricated allegations and the subsequent client terminations will speak for itself. The deposition was scheduled for the following week. I spent several days preparing, reviewing documents and refreshing my memory about the timeline of events. It was strange to relive those experiences, to remember the shock and humiliation of being demoted to janitor, and to contrast that with the success I'd achieved since then. On the day of the deposition, I arrived at the law firm's downtown offices, wearing a conservative business suit and carrying a folder of documents. The conference room was filled with lawyers representing various parties, the bankruptcy estate, Marcus, Jessica, Amanda, and Bradley. Marcus was there, looking pale and nervous. Jessica and Amanda sat together, whispering occasionally to their attorney. Bradley was at the far end of the table, avoiding eye contact with everyone. The questioning began with basic background information, my role at Morrison & Associates, my relationship with the clients, and my track record of success. Then the attorney moved to the events leading up to my demotion. Ms. Hayes, can you describe the allegations that were made against you in March of last year? I explained the accusations about unauthorized commitments, reckless negotiation tactics, and exposing the company to liability. I described the meeting where I was presented with the fabricated evidence and the decision to demote me to facilities management. Did you believe these allegations were accurate? No. I knew they were false because I had documented every decision I'd made and every commitment I'd given to clients. The allegations were based on conversations and emails that had been taken out of context or misrepresented. Have you learned anything since then about how these allegations were created? I looked at Marcus, who was staring at his hands. Yes. I've learned that the documentation supporting the allegations was fabricated. How do you know this? Because one of the people involved in creating the fabricated evidence confessed to me personally. The room was silent as the implications of my testimony sank in. The attorneys for Marcus, Jessica, Amanda, and Bradley were furiously taking notes, probably preparing damage control strategies. The questioning continued for 3 hours, covering every aspect of my experience at Morrison & Associates. I answered each question truthfully and completely, but I avoided editorializing or expressing personal opinions about the motives of my former colleagues. When the deposition was over, I gathered my documents and prepared to leave. As I walked toward the door, Marcus approached me. Victoria, I know this is difficult for you. Thank you for being fair in your testimony. Marcus, I just told the truth. That's all I can do. I know. And I want you to know that I don't blame you for what happens next. We made our choices, and now we have to live with the consequences. As I left the law firm, I felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief because I'd fulfilled my obligation to tell the truth, and sadness because the truth was going to have serious consequences for people I'd once cared about. 6 months later, the legal proceedings were resolved. Marcus, Jessica, Amanda, and Bradley had all agreed to plea agreements that included financial restitution and probation. None of them went to prison, but their careers in consulting were effectively over. I learned about the resolution through a brief news article in the business section of the Seattle Times. The headline read, "Former Morrison & Associates employees plead guilty to fraud charges." The article mentioned that the case had been resolved through testimony from a former employee who had been targeted by the fabricated allegations. I didn't feel vindicated or satisfied by the news. I felt tired, and ready to move on completely from the Morrison & Associates chapter of my life. That evening, Miguel knocked on my office door. "I saw the news," he said. "How are you feeling about it?" "I'm feeling like it's finally over. The truth is out, justice has been served, and everyone can move forward." "What do you think happens to them now?" "I think they'll find other careers, probably outside of consulting. They're all talented people who made terrible decisions driven by fear and insecurity. Hopefully, they'll learn from this experience and build better lives." "And what about you? What happens next?" I looked around my office, at the awards on the walls, the photos of successful project completions, and the view of Seattle that had become so familiar over the past year. Hayes Strategic Consulting had grown beyond my wildest expectations, but more importantly, it had been built on the foundation of principles I truly believed in. What happens next is that we keep building. We keep serving clients, solving problems, and creating value. We keep proving that success built on integrity is stronger than success built on deception. Miguel smiled. "That sounds like a good plan." As he left my office, I opened my laptop and began working on a proposal for a new client. The past was finally behind me, and the future stretched ahead with unlimited possibilities. The transformation was complete, the justice was served, and the work continued. 2 years after I'd put on a janitor's uniform and watched my career collapse in real time, I stood in the ballroom of the Four Seasons Hotel in Seattle, accepting the Washington State Business Excellence Award for Hayes Strategic Consulting. The award recognized companies that demonstrated exceptional growth, innovation, and commitment to ethical business practices. As I looked out at the audience of business leaders, clients, and colleagues, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. The company that had started as a desperate attempt to salvage my career had become one of the most respected consulting firms in the Pacific Northwest, with annual revenues exceeding $50 million and a client list that included 12 Fortune 500 companies. But the numbers, impressive as they were, weren't what mattered most. What mattered was that we'd built something sustainable, something that created real value for clients while providing meaningful work for talented professionals who shared our commitment to excellence and integrity. Miguel, now our chief operating officer and a partner in the firm, stood at the back of the ballroom with the rest of our team. In 2 years, he'd completed an MBA program, led multiple successful projects, and proven himself to be one of the most capable business leaders I'd ever worked with. His transformation from facilities management to executive leadership was a testament to the power of recognizing potential regardless of traditional credentials. As I walked back to my table after the ceremony, I was approached by a young woman who looked familiar but whom I couldn't immediately place. Ms. Hayes? I'm Sarah Chen, Marcus Chen's younger sister. I was wondering if I could speak with you for a moment. I remembered Marcus mentioning his sister during our time at Morrison & Associates. She was a recent MBA graduate who'd been looking for opportunities in consulting. Of course, Sarah. How can I help you? I wanted to thank you for the recommendation letter you wrote for me. I know it must have been awkward, given what happened with Marcus, but your recommendation was instrumental in my getting the position at Deloitte. I was confused. Sarah, I didn't write a recommendation letter for you. You didn't? But the letter was signed by you, and it specifically mentioned my potential for strategic thinking and client relationship management. I realized what had happened. Sarah, I think your brother may have written that letter using my name. I never received a request for a recommendation, and I've never met you before tonight. Her face fell. Oh no. I had no idea. I'm so sorry, I would never have asked him to do something like that. Sarah, it's not your fault. But I'm curious, how has your experience at Deloitte been? It's been excellent. I've received positive reviews, been promoted once, and been assigned to increasingly complex projects. My supervisors seem pleased with my work. Then you earned that position through your own capabilities, not through a fraudulent recommendation letter. The letter may have gotten you the interview, but your performance is what got you the job and the promotion. Sarah looked relieved. Thank you for saying that. I was worried that my entire career had been built on a lie. Sarah, can I ask you something? Are you interested in continuing to work in consulting? Absolutely. I love the variety, the intellectual challenges, and the opportunity to work with different clients and industries. Would you be interested in learning more about opportunities at Hayes Strategic Consulting? Her eyes widened. Are you serious? After what Marcus did, you'd consider hiring me? I'm not hiring Marcus. I'm potentially hiring Sarah Chen, who has demonstrated strong performance at Deloitte and who has the kind of family background that gives her insight into the consequences of poor decision-making. We exchanged contact information, and I promised to follow up with her about potential opportunities. As she walked away, I thought about the strange ways that life created opportunities for redemption and growth, even in the aftermath of betrayal and disappointment. Later that evening, I was in my office reviewing proposals for several new projects when Miguel knocked on my door. Congratulations on the award, he said. It's well-deserved recognition for what you've built here. What we've built, I corrected. None of this would have been possible without your contributions. Victoria, I want to talk to you about something. I've been thinking about the conversation you had with Sarah Chen tonight. What about it? I think hiring her could be a good opportunity for the firm, but I also think it could be a good opportunity for you personally. It might be a way to close the circle on what happened at Morrison & Associates. I considered his perspective. What do you mean? I mean that by hiring Marcus's sister and helping her build a successful career in consulting, you'd be demonstrating that your success isn't built on holding grudges or seeking revenge. It's built on recognizing potential and creating opportunities for people who are committed to doing good work. Miguel was right. Hiring Sarah Chen would be a symbolic conclusion to the Morrison & Associates story, proof that I'd moved beyond the betrayal to focus on building something positive and sustainable. Set up an interview, I said. Let's see if she's as impressive in person as she was at Deloitte. 3 weeks later, Sarah Chen joined Hayes Strategic Consulting as a senior analyst. Her first project was working with Catherine Walsh on a succession planning initiative for one of Pinnacle Financial's subsidiary companies. Catherine, who had become something of a mentor to me over the past 2 years, was impressed by Sarah's analytical skills and professional demeanor. She reminds me of you when you were starting out, Catherine told me. Smart, ambitious, but also humble enough to learn from experience. I hope she has an easier path than I did, I replied. Victoria, I don't think an easier path would have made you a better consultant. The challenges you faced, the betrayal you survived, the resilience you developed, all of that contributed to the leader you've become. As I sat in my office that evening, working on a strategic plan for Hayes Strategic Consulting's expansion into new markets, I reflected on Catherine's words. The betrayal that had nearly destroyed my career had ultimately made me stronger, more self-reliant, and more committed to building something that would outlast any individual relationship or business cycle. The janitor's uniform was still hanging in my office closet, not as a reminder of humiliation, but as a symbol of the most important lesson I'd learned, that dignity comes from how you respond to adversity, not from the position you hold or the recognition you received. I thought about Bradley Morrison, who had disappeared from the consulting industry after the legal proceedings. I thought about Marcus, Jessica, and Amanda, who had chosen different career paths after their consulting aspirations were derailed by their own poor decisions. I thought about Robert Morrison, who had struggled to rebuild his reputation after the collapse of his family's company, but mostly, I thought about the future. About the clients we would serve, the problems we would solve, and the people we would help achieve their own transformations. About the legacy we were building through consistent performance, ethical behavior, and genuine commitment to creating value for everyone we worked with. Hayes Strategic Consulting had grown beyond my wildest expectations, but it had also remained true to the principles that had guided its founding: expertise over politics, relationships over transactions, and integrity over profit. Those principles had attracted the best clients, the most talented employees, and the kind of sustainable success that couldn't be undermined by corporate politics or personal betrayal. As I turned off my computer and prepared to leave the office, I looked out at the Seattle skyline one more time. The city lights twinkled in the darkness, representing thousands of businesses, millions of careers, and countless opportunities for people who were willing to work hard, treat others with respect, and never give up on their dreams. The transformation was complete, the justice was served, and the future was brighter than ever. I'd learned that the most powerful revenge against betrayal wasn't destruction, it was building something so successful, so sustainable, and so meaningful that the betrayal became irrelevant. I'd started this journey as Victoria Hayes, Senior Business Development Manager. I'd survived it as Victoria Hayes, Janitor. And I'd completed it as Victoria Hayes, CEO of Hayes Strategic Consulting, a company built on the foundation of everything I'd learned about resilience, integrity, and the power of refusing to let other people's failures define your future. The countdown had ended long ago, but the real work was just beginning. And I couldn't wait to see what we would build next. The janitor's uniform had taught me that